bespoke radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network and KGRA, the Global Radio Alliance.
I need your help to get to the year 1985.
You're listening to Fade to Black with Jimmy Church on the Game Changer Network.
Good evening. Fade to Black. Bespoke radio for the masses. Man. Today's Monday, March 13th. 72 days into the new year, just 293 days left. That's right. We are live from a bunker somewhere in downtown Burbank, California, and I would like to welcome everybody listening all around the world, all across the United States. Hither and thither, to and fro, back and forth, up and down, east and west, north and south, far and near. This is Fade to Black for KJCR, the Game Changer Network, and KGRA, the planet. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. What is cracking, everybody? Busy weekend around here. Busy day today. Busy yesterday. Coast to coast last night. Getting home at 3 a.m. Wandered over here to the bunker and got today ready. How you doing, man? I'm in a great mood. Tonight, why am I in a great mood? Because tonight, we have the one and only Randall Carlson right here. Can you believe it? It's going to be a great show tonight. Randall, very smart man, here to share that knowledge with all of you. Tomorrow night, John D'Souza, the X-Man, is going to be here. That's tomorrow night. Can you believe it? The X-Files, the real guy, FBI. Oh, man. So that's tomorrow night. Wednesday, Linda Moulton Howe is going to be here. We're going to talk about the pyramids in Alaska and Antarctica and what is going on there. Only her research, right? Here we go with that. And that'll be on Wednesday. Thursday night is another Fader night with John Rappaport and his No More Fake Newsroom Live. Call-in numbers 323-825-5045. I'll try to get to some phone calls tonight. I really know that it's a big show and it's Randall, but it's his first time on the show with us, and which always means I've got, a million questions, and there's a lot of information to get out there the first crack at it. So, but we'll try to get to phone calls, okay? I promise. If we can, we will do it. Follow us on Twitter at JChurchRadio. That's what you want to do, at JChurchRadio, Facebook, YouTube. And go over to jimmychurchradio.com and click on the follow, like, and subscribe buttons. Welcome to everybody that is new to the show tonight. We come off of a weekend of coast to coast like that, and we have new listeners, so welcome. This show is a long-form conversation, okay? I don't have questions prepared, just like over a coast. I don't prepare questions. I know my guests, and I know what I want to learn. That's the thing. And I was talking about this not only at Coast, but I do this every night on the show. It's about the journey, isn't it? Right? That's what it is. Life is a big journey. And ultimately, I think that we find that everything is connected. I was speaking with Edward Nightingale earlier today. And I said to him, I bet we could connect the dots, 6 degrees of separation from the Great Pyramid in Giza to the JFK assassination. I bet we can do it, right? We probably really could. And he just laughed. He said, yeah, you're absolutely right. That would be easy. And that's what we do here. So welcome. All right. The sandbox is hashtag F2B on Twitter. So if you're on Twitter, especially if you're new to the show, we use TweetDeck. Hashtag F2B is the sandbox. All right. Now, in Twitter, you use hashtags. We all understand that. But when you hashtag in TweetDeck, you get a column going that automatically feeds. You don't have to click refresh or notifications. It just works, right? It's really, really cool. So that's what we use here. And if you don't have TweetDeck, go and get it. Go to twitter.com. It's a Twitter product. Download it and get it going. If you need instructions, you need some help, just open it up and then head over here and say, hey, I'm a Fadernaut. I'm new to this thing. I need some help. It's very simple, okay? We're very friendly. We usually do 2 or 3, maybe 4,000 tweets per night in real time on this show. And it was almost like that last night on Coast to Coast. It's getting closer. It's and this is the other thing. This is what's really fun for me. The Fadernauts in our family, the way that you guys have built this Twitter machine, right? This is unique in all of radio and all of broadcast. The way that we use it and the way that everybody else is two different things. We've got our own thing going here, right? Now, and if you think about that, so I go over to Coast, and obviously it's the largest audience in the world, right? The largest overnight radio live talk show in the world and has been for 20, 25 years. But even over there, it's not Twittified yet. It's just not. It's not even close to what we do over here on TweetDeck and Fade to Black. And so if you're new to the show, that's what you do. It's fully interactive. Subscribe to our podcast. We have over 600 archive shows right now. Custom apps, Apple, Android, all platforms for just $2 a month. We've got that there for everybody that cannot listen to the show live. They want to have an app. They want to be able to get in their car in the morning, plug it in, USB, and hit play. And I get that. That's what it's there for. That's why it's just $2 a month. It's just there to provide a service for all of you. But you can go and subscribe and help support the show. It's just $2 a month. Just go over to jimmychurchradio.com. Click on the banners right there. There's a podcast banner on the homepage. Click on it. Download the apps. You're off and running. It's very simple. And also support the show with all of our sponsors, Life Change Tea, GetTheTea.com, River Moon Coffee, Studio Dome Speakers. Click on all of their banners over at jimmychurchradio.com. Use the promo codes for discounts and free shipping. It's all right there. The promo codes are in the banners. Okay? All right. Now, here we are sitting at March 13th. And a few things are coming up in the near future. One of them is Contact in the Desert. That is May 19th through the 22nd in Joshua Tree, California. Tickets and info over at jimmychurchradio.com. We've got a few different conferences right now that are coming up. We've got conflicts and schedules. We've got things and decisions to make. But as we start to put those together, we'll get all of those posted too as well. We're giving away passes to Contact in the Desert. There's one entry per person. Just go to our website, click on the contest banner. It's right there. It's very simple. And the pass is non-transferable. So if you win a pass, which is cool, go ahead and enter, win. It's cool. I get it. But if you can't go, just let us know, and we'll have another name drawn. Okay, we're going to start announcing names this week, next week, to all of the lucky winners, and good luck. All right, let's get the show cracking. Today, happy birthday to Disturbed frontman David Draymond. Have you heard Sounds of Silence? Have you heard that? Have you heard the Disturbed version of that? Dude, David Draymond, he's got pipes. On this day in history, 1781, planet Uranus is discovered by William Herschel with a telescope. First planet discovered with a telescope. Now, although Uranus was visible by the naked eye, it's a huge giant, right? Visible. Everybody thought it was a star, right? Through all of those years, it's almost hard to believe. But it took William Herschel and his telescope to discover planet Uranus. Happened in 1781. Fader fact: Quentin Tarantino asked Kurt Cobain to play the heroin dealer Lance in Pulp Fiction. That is a Fader fact. Now, Lance, as we know, ended up being Eric Stoltz. And if you think about it for a second. He kind of looks like Kurt Cobain, doesn't he? He does. The ginger version, but he kind of looks like Kurt Cobain. What's going on with that? What a different movie it would have been if you think about it, right? Having Kurt Cobain play the heroin dealer, which would have been epic. But watching Pulp Fiction today, how trippy that would, I don't know, maybe he'd still be alive today. Who knows? But anyway, there you go. That is a Fader fact. Tonight, very special guest, Randall Carlson. Tomorrow night, John D'Souza will be here. Wednesday, Linda Moulton Howe. Thursday, Fader Night with John Rappaport and his No More Fake Newsroom Live, followed by Open Lines all night long. All right, man, I can't wait. Randall Carlson, unreal. Get ready for that. And all of your questions or comments tonight for Randall or myself, but for Randall, use hashtag F2BQ. That's Fade to Black Questions. Hashtag F2BQ. David Draymond sings that so beyond that it's a religious experience. Yeah, you're right about that, Allison. The first time that I heard it, oddly enough, I was in the bunker, and Rita was playing it in her studio down the hall, loudly. And I'm in here working, and I listened to it, and she played it over and over again. I understand why now. But I didn't know who it was. That's the last person I would have thought. And so I go do a little Google search, sounds just, and I was like, dude, it's Disturbed? Man, and there's a version, I think it's on Conan with an orchestra live that is really, really good too. Both versions, the studio version is good, but the Conan version is excellent as well. All right. The War of the Worlds. The War of the Worlds. Orson Welles, famous broadcast, right? Every time I say War of the Worlds, I just want to drink Fade to Black blend by River Moon Coffee. I don't know. It just happens. The War of the Worlds. Now, some interesting things have been going down lately. And April 1st is coming up. And, April Fool's Day. And I'll be over hosting Coast to Coast. That's on a Saturday night. And, it's April Fool's night on Coast. And, we're kicking around ideas. And, we're going to do something fun. But the War of the Worlds messed it up for everybody. And what I mean by that is you can't do, here's Coast to Coast, right? Or Fade to Black. If April 1st was on a Fade to Black night and we were broadcasting, the perfect thing for me to do here would be some crazy fake UFO broadcast. But we can't do it. It would be fun, but we can't. War of the Worlds messed it up for everybody. Right? It was performed as a Halloween episode of the series The Mercury Theater on air on Sunday, October 30th, back in 1938, over the CBS radio network. And, of course, it was directed and narrated by Wells. And the episode adaptation was, of course, H.G. Wells' novel, The War of the Worlds. And it became famous for allegedly causing mass panic. And although the reality of the panic is disputed, as the program had relatively, as we know now, very few listeners. But nonetheless, it has become legend, right? The first 2/3 of the 1-hour broadcast was presented as a series of simulated news bulletins, which it sounds so fun to do today, man. I would just love to do it, but you just can't. And those news bulletins suggested an actual alien invasion by Martians was currently in progress. The illusion of realism was further because of the Mercury Theater on the air was a sustaining show without commercial interruptions. And the first break in the program came almost 30 minutes into the broadcast. Now, today, that popular legend holds that some of the radio audience may have been listening to the Edgar Bergen show and then tuned into the War of the Worlds during a musical interlude, thereby missing the clear and concise introduction of the show that said it wasn't real, that it was a drama, right? Well, in those days, following the adaptation, widespread outrage was expressed in the media, just like fake news today. The program's news bulletin format was described as deceptive by some newspapers. Public figures got into it, leading to an outcry against the perpetrators of the broadcast and calls for regulation by the Federal Communications Commission. It changed everything. It messed it up for all of us. But it was also genius. Amazon's The Man in the High Castle, loosely based on a Philip K. Dick novel, is ramping up now for its third season. Rita and I have binged on the first 2 seasons, and well done, well shot, pretty trippy. The Nazis have the east side of the United States, east of the Rockies. West of the Rockies is Japan, and the Rocky Mountains itself is a no man's land, a no buffer zone, a DMZ zone, if you will, in the middle between the east and the west. And so you have all of this Nazi imagery and so forth. And Amazon, to promote this, has done a pretty couple of crazy things. And back in 2015, when the show first launched, they took a subway train in New York. I can't even believe they did this. They took chairs on one side of the subway train, which they use in the series, these American flags that have the 13 stars and stripes, but instead of the 13 stripes, white, red, and then instead of having the stars there's a Nazi swastika eagle in the blue square. All right, that's the new American flag. And they put those on the backs of subway seats in New York, right? And that was on one side of the subway car. On the other side, they did the Japanese version that the Japanese in the series, in the book, were doing on the West Coast, right? The Japanese, so you have the 13 stripes with the Japanese imperial insignia up in the blue square instead of stars. They actually ran a subway train. Now, people are getting on this subway train to ride to work, and they're looking around, and they see these seats that have swastikas on them, right? Must have really tripped them out. Pretty bold marketing, I would say. Well, there's something else that Amazon is doing today, and it is flipping people out. Just like the War of the Worlds, and just like fake news, there is a reason why we can't do certain things today. Right now, that thriller, the Philip K. Dick novel, is set in 1962. And the Axis powers, they win World War II, right? We don't win, they win. And like I said, the East Coast belongs to Germany. West Coast is in the clutches of Imperial Japan. At South by Southwest in Austin last week, Austin, Texas, as part of another marketing campaign, the first one 2 years ago was these subway seats. Now, you know what they're doing? They've created a radio station, and it's called Resistance Radio. It's an internet-based fake radio station broadcast by the fictional American Resistance from the TV show. There you go. Thank you for posting this, Bob. That's an actual subway. This is a real picture. You would think that was fake. That is a real, is that crazy? Is that nuts? Well, anyway, okay. So they've started this fake internet radio station. And they started a hashtag resistance radio, right? And it spread like wildfire. Twitter lit up. And who else lit up? And think about this for a second. Okay, there's the Japanese version right there. How'd you like to get on a subway car and see that? Lord have mercy. All right, that's going to get a retweet. Thank you, Bob. That's really good work right there. All right. So this took off. And the hashtag Resistance Radio did its job on Twitter. And then what happened? Some Trump supporters seemingly mistook it for an actual anti-Trump radio station and have started to post their, what's the word I want to use? Anger. Now remember, this is Resistance Radio. It's done. It's acting, and it's from 1962. But people are going 1962. It's just a marketing campaign, right? But Trump supporters are tripping out. They go and listen to it, and they immediately hear, not that it's anti-Nazi and anti-American. It's Resistance Radio. That suddenly this Resistance Radio, which is supposed to be talking about anti-Nazi stuff and anti-Japan stuff, is about Trump. And I gotta say, the tweets are some of the funniest things you can read on the net anywhere. And of course, there was the Orson Welles not so funny side of it, where there are people who will believe anything that they hear or read. And that was a lesson that I thought we all learned from the original broadcast of War of the Worlds. But now, with fake news and that phenomenon, I guess it's fair game these days, if you think about it. Now, I don't know, and when I say War of the Worlds ruined it for all of us, this is exactly what I'm talking about. We can't even do this today because of what it causes. And people are going to hear what they want to hear. I went through and collected a bunch of tweets. One tweet read, and remember, this is about a fake 1962 broadcast coming off of a fake internet radio station called Resistance Radio. That's it. And it's pro-American, anti-Nazi, anti-Japan propaganda from a Philip K. Dick novel promoting an Amazon fictional TV series. That's all it is. But it's freaking people out. They listen to it and they trip. So listen to some of these tweets. And these are direct. Getting tired of the resistance. What are they resisting? They would all rather the USA fail than admit Trump does anything good. What? I'm not making this up. They actually think. Here's another one. Because CNN, NBC, CBS, ABC, MSNBC, and BBC weren't enough to get Hillary elected, so let's try radio too late. Idiots. Hashtag Resistance Radio. It's anti-Nazi. But people are hearing Hillary. It's crazy. Here's another one. What is this left-wing loony resistance radio nonsense? Are they still resisting facts like Trump is president and crooked may go to prison? Oh, my God. It's crazy. It's nuts. Here's another. Are you ready? What? Resistance Radio. Good luck outpacing Rush Limbaugh, Mark Levin, Sean Hannity, Todd Schnitt, The Blaze, and others. The airwaves are ours. Yeah. Here's another one. LOL, Resistance Radio. It should do just as well as Era America did. Now, referring to the now defunct left-leaning radio network that, unlike Resistance Radio, was actually real and existed, by the way. And here's another one. This was somebody who is opposed to Trump. Used the hashtag in another serious tweet. And here it is. Here's a quote. Keep focus on treason for real Donald Trump and Russia hacked American democracy. Lock 'em up, lock 'em up, lock 'em up. Hashtag Resistance Radio. What is going on? And I just got to say, listen to me. War of the Worlds messed it up for everybody. So since War of the Worlds until now, Resistance Radio and this kind of thing, we can't do it. It was hands off. FCC came into play. You can't do fake, you just can't. And April 1st is coming up. I would love to do a mock show, like a Spinal Tap version of Conspiracy, and just have fun. I can't. Because there are people out there that would actually believe all the jokes that we would be doing on the show. Just like if you go back to the Area 51 caller show that we did here, that was obviously not real. And after it was done, I said it wasn't real. And I bring on the real Area 51 caller, Brian Glass, and he tells to this day, everybody thinks that was part of the conspiracy. And that I'm part of it, and that the original Area 51 caller was real, and the new one was there to deceive and to downplay. It's like crazy. We can't have fun anymore. War of the Worlds messed it up for us. And now Resistance Radio jumps into play with a very ingenious marketing campaign that is, well, it's not backfiring. It will bring... Philip K. Dick, that entire thing up and forward. And I get that, right? But then there's the other side. They think it's real, and you'll never be able to convince them otherwise. Tonight, our guest, the one and only Randall Carlson. Sacred geometry, megalithic structures, the world, cataclysms, lost history, the deception, the lie, what is really going on? He's the man. Randall Carlson tonight, tomorrow night, John D'Souza, Wednesday night, Linda Moulton Howe, Thursday night, Fader Night with John Rappaport. Great week coming up. Great evening straight ahead. Stay with us.
You're listening to Jimmy Church, Fade to Black.
Fade to Black will now pause for alien identification.
The station that talks the net. KGRA Radio. When you take the beans from Central America with dashes of Indonesian and African mixed in and then roast it to the dark side of Fade to Black, you create the ultimate brew of fringe. Introducing the Fade to Black blend from Rivermoon Coffee. Yes, Rivermoon's darkest customized roast was created for the love of Fade to Black. The alchemy of masterful roasting and smoking the beans is in every sip of this full-bodied, dark Java. I need my coffee dark, deep, with distinct bittersweet chocolate highlights, just like the bunker. Leaning further into the darkness of the roast is Fade to Black blend from Rivermoon Coffee. Just click on the banner at jimmychurchradio.com and use the promo code F2BBLEND for 15% off of your order today. Göbekli Tepe.
Hi, folks. In a world of GMO, genetically modified organisms, that is, chemicals, processed foods, and a healthcare system that's unraveling like a cheap suit, it's time to prepare. God created herbs, and herbs help man. Our body can heal itself, just sometimes we need assistance. You need some help? GetTheTea.com. That's GetTheTea.com. Our mild detox is quite powerful with its unique blend of 8 different herbs. And if you're looking for more, our non-GMO supplements will help you with different needs you might have. Health should be a top priority. Take care of your health naturally. Log on to GetTheTea.com. That's GetTheTea.com. Give your body a treat. Let the herbs do their thing naturally. Read all the testimonies on the website, GetTheTea.com. That's GetTheTea.com. Sickness and viruses are like intruders, and herbs are like warriors. Let the tea work for you. That's GetTheTea.com.
9 out of 10 geneticists agree.
Fade to Black is not your father's radio show on the Game Changer Radio Network and KGRA, The Planet.
Hi, this is Chase Klutsky with Fate Magazine Radio, and you're listening to Jimmy Church and Fade to Black on the Game Changer Network and the KGRA digital broadcast station, where the Fade or Nots rock.
Hi, this is Rob Reiner from Anvil, and you're listening to JimmyChurchRadio.com.
What's up? I'm Chris. What up? This is Kyle Massey, and you're listening to Jimmy Church Radio.
All right, everybody, welcome back. Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. You can follow me on Twitter at JChurchRadio. Very simple. Tonight, Randall Carlson is here. Tomorrow night, John D'Souza, FBI X-Man. That's tomorrow night. Wednesday night, Linda Moulton Howe. Thursday, John Rappaport, Fader Night, Open Lines, and his No More Fake Newsroom live. Tonight, I'm excited. Randall Carlson finally joins the show. He is a master builder and an architectural designer, teacher, geological explorer. He's a renegade scholar. He has 4 decades of study, research, exploration into the interface between ancient mysteries and modern science. He's been an active Freemason for 30 years and is a past master of one of the oldest and largest Masonic lodges in Georgia. He has been recognized by the National Science Teachers Association for his commitment to science education for young people. The acclaimed 1997 TBS CNN documentary Fire from the Sky was based upon his research into earth change and catastrophic events. He has organized several dozen field expeditions documenting evidence for catastrophic earth change. He has received academic recognition for outstanding work as a student of geology. His work incorporates ancient mythology, astronomy, earth science, paleontology, symbolism, sacred geometry, and architecture, and other arcane and scientific traditions. For over 25 years, he has presented classes, lectures, and multimedia programs synthesizing this information for students of the mysteries. He is uniquely qualified to interpret the hidden meaning of the great masterpieces of mystical architecture, as well as esoteric and occult ritual and symbolism. It is his aspiration to effect a revival of lost knowledge towards the goal of creating a new world based upon universal principles of harmony, freedom, and spiritual evolution. Of course, his website is sacredgeometryinternational.com. The links are over at Jimmy Church Radio. Very simple. Just click on it. And I would like to welcome for the first time Randall Carlson. Randall, I just read your bio, and it sounds like this show. Right? What has taken you so long to get on with this, man? It's just going to be one of those conversations tonight. I'm really looking forward to it.
Me too. And I don't know where you got a hold of the bio. It's been updated a little since then because I noticed a couple things there. He's been a Freemason for 30 years. Let's see, I was initiated in 1978. So I think was that more than 30 years ago?
You know, it's 40, and thank you for making
going
me
on 40.
Yeah, thank you for making me feel 10 years older, and yourself included, right?
Right. Yes.
And
hopefully we both learned something in the last 10 years that we didn't know 10 years ago.
Well, let me start here, and I kind of have to because you're a first-time guest. So you get the first-time guest disclaimer, which the next time you're on the show, you're not going to get it. But tonight you're going to get it, which is this, Randall. It's just you and I sitting on my couch having a conversation as friends. Where we start, where we end, but we're going to end as friends. Are you ready to go?
I'm ready to go, man, and you can't probably come up with anything that I would take personal. So
yeah,
hey,
you know, and that's what one of the things that I love about your presentations and the interviews that you've done in the past, and certainly your guest appearances on Rogan too, which have quickly turned into almost legendary status, and I'm sure that you recognize that where. Your name and your research now has really been elevated. What has that been like? Because I'm sure you were almost invisible, 20 years ago, 2015, 16, 17. It's a different world for you, isn't it?
Yes, it is, Jimmy, in the sense that, when I was invisible, it really made life considerably simpler. I sort of feel guilty because I'm not answering all of the emails that I get and the messages and the questions and so forth. But that, to me, I guess, has been the biggest change. I've got every day, I get emails and messages, people wanting to know where they can find this out. They were thinking about this, and what do I think about that? And so what I'm trying to do now is gather together a lot of this where if I get, 3 or 4 or 5 people asking a similar question, I will sort of answer it generically on the website. But other than that, it's still my same life. I live here in Decatur, Georgia, and, still running my business and practicing my craft and trying to do a lot of writing. I've got a goal to get a book out this summer. The pressure has just gotten built to the point where I can't resist anymore, so I'm pretty much knocking out about 1,000 to 1,500 words every day, and then taking care of business and, taking care of my dogs. And, so life hasn't really changed a whole lot yet.
Well,
but,
one thing is for sure. The world is starting to become smarter. And the thing that I try to drive home here is... paranormal is the new normal. Conspiracy is the new normal. We're starting to figure that out. And you've been waving that flag for a long time, that things are just not what they seem in our world. We are taught one thing, but I know another, and I need to share that information with you. Do you feel that shift change going on globally, that now we are not the crazy ones? You are not the crazy guy. It's everybody else that's a little off kilter.
Yes, I'm definitely picking that up. I've noticed that it's just, I've put this information out there before, and it's always received a pretty enthusiastic response, but a very limited response. And suddenly, like you named the years, within the last 2 to 3 years, I think what it is there's just a hunger for some kind of knowledge and information that goes beyond the orthodox paradigms that we're all being spoon-fed from the time we're introduced into, the modern educational system. And I've been doing this literally since the day I got out of high school. It was like a liberating experience, and the day I walked out of that high school, I said, now I can really begin my education. And that was 1969, and I made a commitment at that point to learn as much as I possibly could about the meaning of life, our situation here on Earth, what does it mean to be human, what is the big picture, what are the most important things we need to know. So that's kind of what motivated me, and I set out on this quest and became obsessed. So here I am, still doing it. Now, after all of these years, people are starting to pay attention and take notice.
What was that one thing that was the epiphany? You know, the one thing where you just stepped back as a young man and went, wait a minute, right? There was something that caused you to go down this path. And what was it?
Well, you know, I think what it was a series of kind of smaller epiphanies that led up. You know, it was part of growing up in a rural Midwestern environment and becoming interested in science early on in my life. Both my mother and a grandmother were very interested in science and introduced me to science, like from the day I could read in second or third grade. And my father told me a lot about, you know, well, where we live here, you know, there used to be a big ice cap here, and it was 1,000 feet thick. And when it melted away, it left these lakes behind. We had land bordering one of these glacial meltwater puddles that happened to be one of the 15,000 lakes in Minnesota. And in near our backyard, there was a large erratic boulder. I don't know if you know what an erratic boulder is. It's a boulder that has been transported from its original location as part of the bedrock, and it is now sitting in a foreign landscape and usually associated with bedrock of a completely different type of lithology or rock type.
Right.
And I used to go sit on that rock and sit there and kind of think, what is this big rock doing here? You know, it was about a 6-foot rock, and I was, you know, probably 6, 7, 8 years old and playing on that rock. And then, but there was a couple of things I could point out that I would say another thing was one of the places we used to go quite frequently as kids, and then even as I grew up, and it was actually a place that it was the last site that I visited when I was traveling with Graham Hancock when he was researching Magicians of the Gods. And this is a place up on the St. Croix River, which forms the border between Minnesota and Wisconsin, and it's a tributary to the Mississippi.
Right.
And there's a basalt bedrock outcrop on the western side of the river right there, and on this outcrop are a series of gigantic potholes. Some of them are 15 and 20 feet wide and 70 and 80 feet deep. And these are round holes that have been drilled into the hard basalt bedrock. And as a kid, you know, we would go up there, and my grandparents used to like to go there, and they took me up there several times, and my grandmother would tell me, well, you know, this was created by water flowing through here. And of course, we're standing up, you know, 60, 70, 80 feet above the modern river. And I would just stand there and peer down into these big holes drilled into the rock and wonder, how did this get here? You know, and of course, back then, you know, we're talking about late 50s and early 60s, you know, pretty much there was no discussion or really awareness outside a complete fringe about catastrophism. So, you know, there was nobody to tell me, well, what you had here was about 200 to 300 foot deep, extremely turbulent meltwater floods coming off of the ice sheet, probably moving at 40 to 60 miles an hour, and they're so turbulent that they're colting, which means they're forming underwater tornadoes that can literally pick up sediment and drill right into the rock in a matter of probably days to a few weeks. And it wasn't something that took place over millions of years. Of course, back then I didn't understand that, but
right.
Nonetheless, standing there peering into these holes in the bedrock definitely, you know, interested me and kind of excited my curiosity. But you know, there is kind of an epiphany I really did have, which was early summer of 1969, and I think I've discussed this maybe on Joe's or something. But I was there's a place just southwest of Minneapolis called Flying Cloud Airport, and they used to have rock concerts, outdoor rock concerts there back in the late 60s. Early 70s, in a field that was on a series of bluffs overlooking the Minnesota River Valley. Now, the Minnesota River, modern river, is a tributary to the Mississippi. And I remember specifically this one day, we went out there, was enjoying a rock festival and whatever, and then there was a break, and I decided I was going to wander off because it's a pretty interesting country. There's a series of bluffs, and these bluffs are about 200 feet high. The concert was taking place up. They had a stage set up on top of the bluffs, but I wandered over to where I could kind of get a good view of the valley below me. And right there, the valley is it varies, but it's about 3 to 5 miles wide. And basically, I'm standing there on the edge of the bluff looking down, and I see the Minnesota River. And the modern Minnesota River is it's not an insignificant little river. It's not one of the great rivers of North America. But what really intrigued me as I'm standing there looking at it was I could see, it was my first intimation of scale invariance, which is a extremely important and valuable way of looking at phenomena. And you find it very much in mathematics, particularly in sacred geometry. You find it in architecture, where you find it profusely in geology. And basically what it means is that you see the same patterns and relationships regardless of the scale. So in geology, I don't know if you've ever looked at a geology textbook or a journal article about some geological subject, and there's a photograph, say, for example, of an outcrop. And next to that outcrop, there will always be something, usually a rock pick or a hat or a person standing there, so you can get a sense of the scale. Because
right.
if you take that out, you're going, well, wait a second, am I looking at something there that's 2 feet high, 10 feet high, or 100 feet high? You don't know. So
right.
That's an example of scale invariance. Okay, so back to me standing there on the bluff. I'm looking down and I see into the valley, and I could see very clearly the Minnesota River flowing within a channel. And it was a small channel with meanders in it. And the thing that hit me was that as I'm standing there, I'm looking, miles across, and on the other side of the Minnesota River Valley is another set of bluffs that match the ones I'm standing on. And I remember I'm kind of like looking at the smaller, like micro scale scene below me, and then looking up and seeing these bluffs, 3 miles away that are 200 feet high, and getting this sense that this is like a gigantic version of that river channel down there that I'm looking at. So that really struck me. It impressed me for some reason, although then I went on and kind of forgot about it for a few years until I began doing a lot of reading, about the mid-'70s, I would say, when I started really reading into catastrophism and some of the alternate ideas about Earth history, and came upon the idea that there had been some very large-scale floods at the end of the last ice age. Now, since then, I've learned a considerable amount. I know that what happened was in the 80s, I was giving a lecture on sacred geometry, and I was talking about scale invariance, and in using examples from geometry where you have certain patterns where the piece of the pattern replicates the whole of the pattern.
Right.
It's a concept of like fractals, like fractal self-similarity is the same idea. So I was talking about this in the context of geometry and architecture, and then I shifted over and I said, in the natural world we find examples, and I started talking about geology, geological examples, and then I brought up this story I just told you about standing on the bluffs and seeing this scale invariant relationship between the small little river channel, 500 feet out and down below me in the valley floor, and this much larger sort of replica of it. Well, it just so happened that there was a geologist in the audience, and he was basically challenged me. He said, no. And I said, that was my first intimation of catastrophism, and that I was looking at something that was a gigantic version, and it had to have been a catastrophic flow that would have created it. And then he said, well, no, that was formed over millions of years. And I said, well, no, I'm pretty sure that we're not looking at something that was, formed just, by the modern river. That was what he was saying, is that basically give the modern river enough time and it's going to create a valley. Right. Well, basically that's just kind of my nature. He challenged me, and I said, okay then. So I went right then, not long after that, enrolled in a university and majored in geology so that I could, and of course I didn't learn anything at all about, the Minnesota River, any of that, but I learned quite a bit of geology, and I did fairly well academically. But then later on, I have learned, that yes, that paleohydrologists have looked at that and have concluded that there was a gigantic meltwater river that flowed through there. They call it River Warren. It's I did the quick calculation, and it was estimated to be what would be about 4,000 times greater in volume than the modern Minnesota River. Now, one of the sites that we went and visited with Graham.
Let me jump in. Let me jump in right there, Randall, because the visual of what you are describing there is something that is hundreds of feet deep, trillions of just a monstrosity amount of water compared to what you were looking at. And that is what you start to wrap your mind around that, how deep the water was and how wide it would cover the entire state, probably most of North America, if you start to look at it in those terms and you start to scale it up.
Well, what I realize now, of course, is that what I was looking at was just one single meltwater stream coming off of the great ice sheet.
Right.
And there were literally hundreds of streams simultaneously flowing off the ice sheets in all directions.
Right.
Water coming from under the ice, coming on top of the ice,
right.
Coming through the ice, water flowing off to the south, water flowing off to the Pacific Ocean, water flowing off into the North Atlantic, and even water catastrophically flowing off into the Arctic Ocean.
Bingo.
This now is what I understand, but I was only then just beginning to see the picture.
Right. Well, I want to back up because I want to stay right here on this subject. When I was studying Indiana history back in Indiana, I'll never forget our teacher said this to the class, and it freaked me out just like you were freaked out. He goes, well, actually, the reason why the southern half of Indiana is all hilly, but the northern part of Indiana is completely flat is because we had 1,000 feet of ice that came down and mashed the state flat. And those hills are where and I sat there visualizing, right? I'm just a kid, tripping out of my mind, right? Just thinking about what it would take to level out the entire part of North America and how big and heavy this was. And I heard you once speak about this, and you had said, and I want to go back and pick your brain on this. You had said that the weight of all of this on North America was affected the rest of the earth because the earth, I'm paraphrasing here, quoting you, but you said the earth is like a balloon, right? And if you push on one side of the balloon, the other side of the balloon is going to expand or contract. And the weight of all of this ice on Canada and North America had cause and effect somewhere else in the world, including the Atlantic Ocean, where land rose and fell with the weight of the ice. It was one of the most cinematic descriptions of what goes on with planet Earth, and you did it in a way that I understood. Now, can you expand on that a little bit and what that actually means, since we are discussing that exact thing right now?
Well, the scientific term for the process that you're referring to is isostatic compensation, which basically says that most people know what continental drift is, plate tectonics and lateral movement of the plates. And anybody who's had a basic geology course or geography course knows that if you push the European and African continents together with North and South America, they pretty well fit together, right? And then that same line is followed more or less parallel by the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. And so you have lateral spreading, horizontal movement of the Earth's plates in continental drift. In isostatic compensation, it's about vertical movements of the Earth's crust.
Right.
And, of course, there's a complex interrelationship between the two because of the fact that the Earth is spinning on its axis. There is a equatorial bulge. The equatorial axis of the Earth is 26 miles greater than the polar axis, right? And so the position of any section of the lithosphere is going to have this relationship that's always delicately balanced, in effect, which is the relationship. It's relationship radially with the center of the Earth, the center of the Earth's mass, and its relationship latitudinally with the equator, which is the position of maximum diameter of the Earth. So you could almost think of it this way: if you're traveling from the equator towards the North Pole, you're in effect going downhill. And in fact, as you've gone 1/4 of the way around the Earth from the equator to the North Pole, you've gone downhill 13 miles. So there's this relationship between any section of the Earth's crust and both its relationship to the Earth's center of mass and its relationship to the equator. Now, if you change either one of those things, then of course you have to compensate somewhere else. Now, what happened with the ice mass growing on North America is that the North American craton, particularly, which is the central ancient bedrock zone of the North American continent, pretty much, up in the area of Hudson Bay, became the center of these massive coalescing ice sheets that eventually maybe got up to 2 miles thick over the center of the ice dome. And in the process of this ice forming on the North American continent, as the ice mass grew in weight, it began to depress the North American continent down. And it may have been as much as 1,000 to 1,500 feet in places, maybe more in some places, because there's probably going to be a variable response.
Right.
While this is happening, it is now creating pressure on the particularly on the ocean basins adjacent to North America, because the analogy that you use, like I think I use the analogy of a beach ball, or you said a balloon, it doesn't matter, but it's the same idea. If you have a beach ball and it's just sitting there, it's going to be more or less symmetrical, but if you push down on it, the sides bulge out. Imagine anybody listening here that you got a beach ball and you press on what could be the North Pole, it's going to bulge out at the equator.
Right.
And so this is the situation that we had. And so when the ice began to melt, and it melted really, really fast within the geological scale of things, there was a massive transfer of weight off of the North American and actually northwestern European continents as well, and all of this mass transfer of weight was from the continents back into the ocean basins. And it's completely and theoretically consistent that as the North American continent is now beginning to rebound, isostatic rebound, the ocean basins are undergoing isostatic depression. And so theoretically, that's, in a nutshell, a very simplified version of the concept. Now, empirically, there is data and evidence to suggest that particularly the floor of the Atlantic Ocean has risen and fallen considerably, has had major vertical movements as a result of these isostatic forces at work. For example,
I've got to jump in and take a break. So we're gonna pick up exactly right here after the break. And also, and I want you to think about this. The first thing that comes to mind, I think, for all of us, and myself included, is this a possibility of Atlantis disappearing? I would love to hear your comments on that. Our guest tonight, Randall Carlson. This is Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. More with Randall after this short break. Everybody, stay right there.
Fade to Black with Jimmy Church on the Game Changer Radio Network and KGRA, the Global Radio Alliance.
The station that talks the net. KGRA Radio.
Hello, I'm Kat Deely, and you're listening to my main man, Jimmy Church, on jimmychurchradio.com.
Hi, this is Ray Sobbs here, repping the planet, and you're listening to my good friend, Jimmy Church, Fade to Black, on the Game Changer Network and the KGRA digital broadcast station.
This is Toby Kebbell. You're listening to jimmychurchradio.com. Don't hurt me, Jimmy. I'm only little.
Hey, I'm Adrian Grenier.
And this is Ari Gold.
We're the Honey Brothers. Well,
We are of the Honey Brothers. Hey, I'm Adrian Grenier.
And I'm Ari Gold.
We're the Honey Brothers.
And you're listening to Jimmy Church.
The Revolution.
What's up, Fadernauts? Studio Dome loves Fade to Black and the F2B audience so much that they have put together the ultimate stereo Bluetooth system. They've done it just for you. Man, check this out. The Studio Dome SBB2 stereo system is here. It's featuring 2 Studio Boombox 2 SBB2 wireless Bluetooth speakers, packed in its own custom hardshell case. This Studio Dome system features the very latest in stereo Bluetooth technology. The 2 full-range boomboxes are in true wireless stereo. You've got to hear this. It's amazing. It's just $129, and use the promo code JCRTWS, and you'll also get free shipping. It's simple. Just go to jimmychurchradio.com, click on the Studio Dome banner. Göbekli Tepe.
Balance of Nature's fruits and veggies.
I was diagnosed with congestive heart failure. I went from being able to work 14, 16 hours a day with no problem to where I could barely walk a block to the store. I went on to the phytonutrients about 6 months ago, and within a couple of months, my medical doctor had cut my prescriptions down in a little bit smaller dosage. The next time I went back a month later, I walked into the doctor's office and he says, "My gosh, what's happened to you? You don't even look like the same person." He looked at my legs and the swelling had gone down. My blood pressure was down. The venous stasis ulcers that I had had on my legs for the last 4 or 5 years because of the poor circulation were all healed, and I'm feeling far better.
The new challenge will allow you to receive 2 months of Balance of Nature's fruits and veggies free. And we'll even ship them to you free. Call now for details. Call 1-800-246-8751. Or go online to balanceofnature.com. Use promo code TALK.
This is Micah Hanks of the Grailian Report, and you're listening to Jimmy Church on Fade to Black, across the globe on the Game Changer Radio Network and the one and only KGRA Radio, The Planet.
All right, welcome back. Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Network and KGRA The Planet. You can follow me on Twitter at JChurchRadio. Our guest tonight, Randall Carlson. Of course, his website is sacredgeometryinternational.com, and the links for that are over at Jimmy Church Radio. Just click. Randall, what's your Twitter handle?
I got to confess, I don't do Twitter.
Okay.
I will be, though, soon.
You know,
I drag kicking and screaming, but I'm going to do it.
Yeah, I don't know if you know, but, Twitter's going to get big. Okay. It's a joke, Randall. You're just supposed to laugh at that point. You're just supposed to, give me a courtesy laugh. But, yeah, these days, everybody has to do just a little bit of everything, don't they? I mean, social network. I mean, there are so many things. What happened to envelopes with stamps? Back in the day, it's not that kind of world anymore, is it? It's just not. What I was referring to right before the break with this is that could this be not only the answer to something like Atlantis, disappearing or appearing, but continents in general? We've just, as you know, the news about this lost continent off of New Zealand, which is significant and large, but it's not there anymore. Could this be the disappearance or appearance of different continents like Atlantis over the years?
Interesting question. And I think what this shows is that, yes, clearly we do understand now that there have been some pretty significant vertical movements of the Earth's crust. We have a cause for it, this phenomena that we were just talking about, isostasy. And I was about to talk about a little bit of the empirical evidence suggesting, in reference to the whole idea of Atlantis. And I should say, by the way, there has been a lot of nonsense written about Atlantis over the years, and a lot of the, I'll use quote-unquote skeptics, will generally jump on that nonsense to dismiss the whole concept of Atlantis right out of hand.
Right.
Without realizing that, okay, you've got to go back to the source, which was Plato's dialogues, Timaeus and Critias. And he doesn't describe, crystal technologies and flying ships or anything really too esoteric or exotic. Basically, what he describes sounds like a somewhat grandiose version of a Phoenician maritime culture. Now, here's the thing. There's clearly evidence that there has been massive subsidence along certain parts of the Atlantic Ocean, particularly along the mid-Atlantic ridge, as a result of this major transfer of mass from the continental surfaces back into the ocean basins. And particularly along the mid-Atlantic ridge, you can find evidence of drowned islands. You find evidence, for example, that's now 2 miles down, that there were shallow water species living there, species that are only found like in less than 200 feet of water.
Right.
It's very clear, sunken beaches, beach sand, that's a mile now under the ocean, that's sitting right out where it shouldn't be. So there's a lot of evidence that there have been considerable vertical movements. And it would make sense that these movements would not necessarily be uniform over the entire ocean basin, but would exploit zones of least resistance, which in this case would be along the mid-Atlantic ridge, which is some of the thinnest crust on the Earth's surface, right? So there are many studies. I have, dozens of studies done by oceanographers and marine geologists along the mid-Atlantic ridge that clearly confirm that, yes, there have been some pretty significant vertical movements along the mid-Atlantic ridge and within recent geological time frames. Now, if you look at some of the islands, like the Azores, for example, the Azores are the tips of mountains that are sitting on what is called the Azores Plateau. The Azores Plateau is a underwater, you could call it a microcontinent. It's about the size of Iceland. And it's basically varies between 1 mile and 2 miles down, and there are a series of very large mountains on this microcontinent, and the tips of those mountains are now the Azores Islands. Now, if you drop sea levels by 400 feet, which just without isostatic adjustment of the Earth's crust at all, just the sea level change of 400 feet, you just about double the size of these islands.
Right.
Now, if you add to there another 500, maybe 1,000, maybe 1,500 feet or more of subsidence of the Earth's crust as a result of this isostatic depression, you now have a pretty substantial landmass right there. And interestingly, during the late Ice Age times, which would have been from about 20,000 to 13,000 years ago, that would have actually been a pretty benign place to live in terms of places around the planet that one might want to live during the drastically altered climatic and environmental conditions of the Ice Age. For one thing, the Gulf Stream followed a different path during the Ice Age. It did not go as far into the Gulf of Mexico as it now does. It also made a 180-degree turn, in a sense, not far north of what is now the Azores. So, you can see what that Gulf Stream, those warmer ocean currents do, basically make northwestern Europe habitable.
Right.
Because England is at a latitude almost of Hudson Bay, where so you can see right there how dramatic the effects of those warm ocean currents are. Well, again, those ocean currents were in effect almost surrounding the Azores during the last Ice Age. So it would have been a very benign place, relatively speaking, for some kind of culture to evolve.
Yeah, not quite tropical, but certainly livable.
Right. And if we look at the climate of the Azores at present, what's interesting, it's been kind of described as being perpetually spring-like. But my point is that, if you go back and read the original Plato, there's not any, and then place that within the context of what we now know about geological change and environmental change and so on, there's nothing really that implausible about his scenario. He gets into details that are pretty interesting, like describing the rock types and saying that, when they built their temples, there were three different types of rock. A white-colored rock, a red-colored rock, and a black-colored rock. And if you examine the lithology of the Azores Plateau, what you find out is that there are black basalts and very light white-colored limestones and red, what are they? I think they're sandstones. I've forgotten what the red rocks are, but they're all there. He describes hot and cold springs that were being utilized by the Atlanteans. And interestingly, in the Azores, you do have both hot and cold springs quite profusely. In some places, they almost emerge out of the ground together. And he describes that. So he's very specific in his details. And if you look at those details one by one, none of them are really too implausible, other than the fact that you have to make the stretch and say, okay, well, 12,000 or 13 or 14,000 years ago, there existed a culture or a society that may have been comparable in sophistication to the Phoenicians or the Minoans, who had navigational skills, who had basically seafaring skills, who were able to build ships. And, if you're not willing to go there, then, of course, you can dismiss all the rest of it and say, well, it all may be plausible. His geography may be plausible. His geology may be plausible, but we're not willing to accept the fact that 14,000 years ago there was any type of culture that could have been on an equivalent level of the Phoenicians, for example. And so it's one of the things that I've definitely committed to developing into a more book-length format, because there's a whole lot of really interesting information and interesting studies that, to my knowledge, have never really been integrated into a coherent whole and then compared line by line with what Plato actually says.
Right.
And interestingly, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'm going to swing back over to the Mediterranean in just a second, but I want to, back here in North America, and with your research that you did with Graham, which was very compelling and well done for magicians, is some very simple facts that haven't been explained. And one of them is, woolly mammoths being, frozen in their tracks with green grass in their stomachs and just, frozen. Now, I just have not heard this explained to my satisfaction. It just doesn't make any sense. But with your research that you were doing up north here in the United States for Graham, did that start to answer some of these questions for you, and how do you explain it?
I wish I could say, yeah, I had it all figured out, but I still don't. And interestingly, you brought that up. The woolly mammoth thing was one of the things that really just struck my curiosity way back. I don't remember. It was probably Velikovsky. I read Earth in Upheaval.
Right.
Of course, Velikovsky has been, pretty much maligned by the scientific establishment. And in his work, he basically, I see his work, there's two parts to it. His documentation of the catastrophic history of the Earth back when nobody else was doing it, but then his attempts to explain the forces behind those catastrophic events, I think, is where he basically went off track. And really, he didn't know back in the mid-50s what we know now about the role of cosmic forces and impacts and things like that. But his work on Earth in Upheaval, I think, has basically stood the test of time and is a really good summation of the type of literature that existed back in the mid-50s on catastrophism. And it was pretty extensive, really, even though strict gradualism was the rule of the day. But one of the things he talked about was the flash-frozen megafauna and the woolly mammoths in particular. And that was one of the things that really, really intrigued me a lot. And trying to come up with an explanation for, what could have happened there. The most famous case was that the Beresovka mammoth that was found, I think it was in 1901, if I remember the date properly. And in 1901, they found the thing. He'd been in a frozen bank along the Beresovka River, and we had been in the Little Ice Age for about off and on for 800 years. And what we see is that in the latter part of the 19th century, the Arctic warming began really in the mid-1800s. This is not something that began in the mid-20th century or even in the last few decades. The Arctic warming began in the mid-19th century. One of the things that happened is that many of the rivers, there was an accumulated ice mass as a result of the Little Ice Age that lasted from about mid-1300s, like I said, to the mid-1900s. So you had this increased ice mass that was melting off particularly strongly around the late 19th century, the late 1800s. And so it caused a swelling of a lot of the rivers that then resulted in erosion that hadn't taken place for close to a millennium. In the course of this erosion, a lot of very interesting things got revealed for the first time in literally 11, 12, 13,000 years. One of these was that there was a mudslide along the banks of the Beresovka River, and what it did was it exposed the head and the forelimbs of a 6-ton buried woolly mammoth carcass. And it was, I think, probably found by some Tungusi reindeer herders or something like that. I've forgotten exactly who found it, but by the following year, it had gotten back to Soviet scientists, and they sent an expedition out. By the time they got there, wolves had actually devoured the flesh off the skull of this mammoth, and so the skull was, the bones of the skull were exposed, but the rest of it was still intact. And like you said, once they began to analyze it, they found that there was, I think, 27 different varieties of sedges and grasses in the mammoth's stomach that had not digested. There was also, the mammoth had a mouthful of food that he hadn't swallowed.
Right.
So it was very clear that he had died rapidly. And the other interesting thing was he was sitting on his haunches, and his hip bones were broken. So, and then the final thing was that really made this interesting was he was found with an erect penis. And what that essentially means, and the biologist looking at this immediately recognized that what that indicated was that the mammoth died by suffocation under considerable pressure. And so in a reconstruction of the events, the mammoth is standing most likely on a savanna-type grassland up in northern Siberia, grazing on the grass, eating, mammoths were grazers. And then, literally within a matter of seconds, this mammoth was thrown back on his haunches so hard that both of his hip bones were broken. He was instantly buried under great pressure and then quick frozen, where he basically sat for thousands and thousands of years until that one spring thaw in 1901 uncovered him. And it was Clarence Birdseye, the inventor of the fast freezing of food, that actually did, I think, the first study trying to determine how quickly this mammoth was frozen. And I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but it was pretty extreme. It was something like, I do know this, it would have taken the entire carcass I think one of his conclusions was that the entire carcass had to be completely frozen through and through within 10 hours or less in order to prevent putrefaction of the contents of the mammoth's stomach.
That's insane. That's just so when you plug that into your mind's eye, what happened? Could it have been a cosmic event? What?
I don't know what else it could have been. if there is a way, and to this day I'm not clear, but my thinking would be if there was a way to convey hyper-frozen gases, perhaps in a piece frozen within a piece of comet nuclei, and that's delivered into the Earth's atmosphere, if there would be some way that through combination, because clearly the circumstances under which the mammoth died, aside from the quick freezing, would suggest something very powerful, like an explosion knocked him back onto his, where he was standing up, and the next thing is he's smashed down onto his ass, and then he had to have been rapidly buried also. So I would be thinking along the lines of perhaps some kind of gases, with a temperature close to absolute zero being introduced into the Earth's atmosphere. But again, I don't really have the mechanism for doing that.
Well, are you?
It's one of those things. It's one of those things that's just been in the back of my mind literally for 40 years, and I still don't have an answer for it, and nobody else does either.
It's almost like you're suggesting, and I'm with you on this, like some big hole opened up in the atmosphere, sucked our atmosphere out, a space atmosphere came in, and I don't want to sound strange here, but some kind of vacuum that would get to some type of absolute zero very quickly. And I don't know, and I just can't compute how that would happen, but it did, right?
It did, yeah. Yeah, and in order to, and see, we can also make inferences about the climate at the time that because the mammoth was grazing on flowering plants. And based upon the seeds and pollen, I think the estimate was that it was probably early fall. But so clearly it was not that cold. If the mammoth is grazing on flowering plants, but 10 hours later, his entire carcass is completely frozen. So somewhere along the line of it had to have been 20 or 30 degrees above freezing for the mammoth to be eating flowering plants, and somewhere around 75 degrees below freezing, or maybe more, to get the mammoth frozen that quickly. And we don't know, Birdseye said 10 hours or less. That could mean 9 hours and 50 minutes, or it could mean 1 hour. I don't know. What you're saying is interesting. I think that's the kind of line of thought. We have to look at something out of the norm here. And this is where I think we're perfectly justified in invoking an outrageous hypothesis, because the whole circumstances of this mammoth and the other frozen megafauna that have been found is an outrageous circumstance.
And I want to, and we're going to head towards a break here in about 5 minutes. Shifting back to, staying on the same subject, but shifting this over to the Mediterranean and the Middle East, we have a couple of things that are going on out there, too, that time along the same timeline. Certainly Graham has written about it, but the evidence now is there, where we have Göbekli Tepe, which is 10,500 BC, 10,000 BC. We have this strange timeline of the last modern ice age that is affecting things globally around the world. And Göbekli Tepe appears. But the thing that I have a problem with the modern ice age being there, where Göbekli Tepe is located, is where does the intelligence come from coming off of the last ice age when there shouldn't have been smart people. There shouldn't have been an intelligence, but clearly Göbekli Tepe is there, and there's no way to explain it. So either we have a lost civilization that was there living in Northern Europe, Siberia, that migrated down to Göbekli Tepe through the last modern ice age. And this is where things get complicated, doesn't it?
Oh, yes. But I think, Jimmy, one of the things that we got to keep in mind, of course, as you say, that it shouldn't have been there. It shouldn't have been there, within the context of the orthodox models of ancient history.
Bingo.
But I think, there's been accumulating evidence for decades now that the orthodox models aren't explaining the real history. And, one of the things that I always like to point out is that, we modern humans, modern in every sense of the word that we think of as being modern, we're most specifically our intelligence, the size of our brain pan that we carry around on top of our shoulders, and realize that, we've now got skeletons of modern humans that have dated to between 150 and 180,000 years old. And how much older than that they go, who knows? But at this point, the oldest one that I know of is around 180,000 years. So that works out. I think if you pictured, roughly, say, 25 years being a generation, then 180,000 years is what? It's about 7,000 plus generations of people. Now, really, so what that boils down to is this. If we think of modern history and generously going back 5,000 years to the appearance of the first, cuneiform writing and so on, in Sumeria and in Egypt and in the Indus Valley, what we realize is that, we're looking at 1/36th of the length of time that we know modern humans have been around.
Right.
So here's a good analogy. Anybody who picks up a 3-foot yardstick, that's 36 inches. So here's a little exercise for people listening. If you've got access to a yardstick, look at it and realize, let that whole length of that yardstick represent the known time that modern humans have been on the planet, and then realize that just 1 inch at the end of that is our recorded history. So it's clear when you begin to think in that context that, most of the history of humans on this planet is not recorded. It's missing. Now, we can infer from that, well, there was nothing happening all of this time. And in the gradualist models of global change, you could think, well, okay, there was nothing really happening. We don't see evidence of cities and technology and infrastructure, 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 years ago. So people were essentially living primitive hunter-gatherer type of existence, and this is all they did for, thousands and thousands of years. Well, what has happened, since these models first came into the forefront of academic thinking, generations ago, is we've learned so much more. We now know that modern people have been around a whole lot longer than it was assumed that they were. We also know that the planet has gone through extraordinarily powerful, dynamic, dramatic changes in the last 150 to 200,000 years, that these huge ice masses have come and gone at least 3 or 4 times in the last 150 to 200,000 years. Sea level going up and down 300, 400, maybe 500 feet. We know that at the end of the last ice age, this transition from the late Pleistocene into the Holocene was broken by these extreme events, a series of extreme events. And at the beginning of this period, between 13 and 14,000 years ago, you had this incredible megafauna inhabiting large regions of the Earth. And at the end of it, you had about over 100 species that had gone extinct, that was not able to survive that transition from the Pleistocene into the Holocene, which basically took place between 11 and 13,000 years ago. And one way I try to put this into perspective for people is that if you were to take a census of all of the megafauna alive on the Earth today, and a megafauna is defined as any animal over 100 pounds in adult body weight,
right,
or 44 kilograms, right? There is, depending on how you divide up the species, maybe 100 to 120 species of large animals. From the Serengeti Plain of Africa to North America. People listen, just think of the list, from the bears and moose and deer and antelope and elephants and hippos and rhinos and giraffes, and just go down the list. Okay, you're going to end up with a list that's going to be between 100 and 120 species.
That's it. That's it.
Yeah, that's it. Of animals, of mammals now over 120 pounds in body weight. Okay, so...
Well, hold on, Randall, I got to take a break right here. I'm blowing past a network break here. I didn't want to interrupt. Right. So let's do that right here. We'll take a break. Randall Carlson is our guest. When we come back, we're talking species and what survived. This is Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. More with Randall right after this break. Stay with us.
listen to Jimmy Church.
You're listening to Fade to Black.
Always on the edge of the hottest alternative talk. Jimmy Church with Fade to Black. KGRARadio.com.
¿Qué tal, mis amigos? Yo soy Mario Carlson, el tiburón, y los invito para que escuchen a mi buen amigo Jimmy Church Radio. ¡Claro que sí!
Hey there, quick question for you. Would you be okay with more energy, more endurance, thicker, healthier hair, a better mood, reduced appearance of wrinkles, improved sleep, improved blood pressure and cholesterol profiles, improved vision, improved memory? Okay then. Well now, have you heard of Nature's Youth RSF? It's from the anti-aging experts at nature'syouth.com. Nature'syouth.com. See, at Nature's Youth, they understand exactly what it means to provide top-quality health products. And Nature's Youth customers not only improve their health, they know they're also providing their body with the right nourishment to maintain that peak performance and fight the aging process. If health, wellness, and nutrition are what you desire, choose Nature's Youth RSF. I did. You see, you're going to get older. It's just up to you how you feel when you get there. Get started today. Nature's Youth RSF. Simple to use, simple to order. Go to nature'syouth.com. That's nature'syouth.com. nature'syouth.com.
I was introduced to this remarkable product, Balance of Nature Fruits and Veggies, and to say it's amazing is an understatement. Balance of Nature provides the nutrients of 9 to 11 servings of 31 different whole ripened fruits and veggies per day, and the cost to the consumer for 9 to 11 servings is about 22 cents per serving, as opposed to over $1 in the store. Balance of Nature Fruits and Veggies helps boost the immune system by over 720%, and they also provide a health coach for you at no charge to guide you with any questions you may have. And you can also visit their website for testimonials on balanceofnature.com. So take steps to give yourself better overall health and call them now, toll free, at 800-246-8751. That's 800-246-8751, or go to balanceofnature.com right now. Make sure to let them know you heard it here by using promo code TALK for a special discount. That's balanceofnature.com and use promo code TALK.
You are listening to Fade to Black with Jimmy Church on the Game Changer Network.
Oi, oi, I'm Reese Evans. You're listening to Jimmy Church. This is Revolution. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution is on radio. Ciao.
Welcome back, Fade to Black. Our guest tonight, Randall Carlson. We're discussing the end of the last modern ice age and Göbekli Tepe existing when academia says, orthodox academia says it shouldn't have been there. But indeed, Randall, you can't take it back down, right? It exists. And we were talking about the species over 100 pounds that survive. So let's pick up right there. And I want to ask you this as we continue the discussion. You're a master builder. You're an architectural designer and a Freemason too. So you know something about rocks, right? And the construction. When you look at Göbekli Tepe, you just touched upon this. Stone Age man, hunter-gatherers, foraging for seeds in the dirt kind of life. But then Göbekli Tepe appears. There's a significant type of intelligence, quarries, feeding. You had to have some kind of organization and civilization and agriculture. Everything had to come into play for Göbekli Tepe to be built by somebody that Orthodox academia tells us was just a Stone Age dude in animal skins. How do we explain that?
Well, within the conventional models, we can't explain it. It just makes no sense to say that they were built by hunter-gatherers, any more than it makes sense to say that, Stonehenge was built by, subsistence farmers.
Right.
There's clearly this other element in our history that conventional models has not been able to recognize up to this point, or has, I think, misinterpreted. But to anybody who begins looking at this stuff, that and clearly, Graham was writing about this, decades ago, saying that when we look at some of the stuff that was going on at the dawn of recorded history between 4,000 and 5,000 years ago, it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that you would have, nomadic hunter-gatherers or subsistence farmers who in these multiple places, all within 1 or 2 centuries, suddenly decide that they're going to create this monumental infrastructure that encodes geometry and astronomy and sophisticated engineering principles, and like you said, the ability to organize on a social level, because clearly when you undertake one of these monumental works, it's going to require a whole support network besides just the people engaged in the actual construction. And, obviously they have to be fed. I mean, even though it's become much more abstracted, if I go out now and I'm building a house, there is a whole massive infrastructure that exists that I'm drawing upon, because I draw upon, I buy lumber that's imported from Canada. I buy goods and products from all over the place, right? That has to have a whole infrastructure intact in order to get it to my suppliers. I work with, trained people in many different disciplines, not only just carpenters and masons, but electricians and plumbers and engineers, and, the list goes on. And so all of this is brought together, and of course, if you took away the social infrastructure, I couldn't really do what I do, right? So they're clearly, and we find this going on all the time. Throughout history, it's like this unexplained thread of history. The last time that I think we see a really spectacular example of that was during the Gothic building era in the High Middle Ages in Europe, where basically you had a feudal type of society that within one generation is building 80 of these gigantic, incredible monuments and about 500 lesser abbeys, all within the next century to century and a half. And, if you've traveled over Europe and visited some of these cathedrals, you realize, my God, the man hours that went into creating these things is just unbelievable. When you look at the stonework and think about the stone that had to be quarried, then cut, and then shaped. When you think about the glaziers doing these amazing stained glass windows with refraction properties that have still not been duplicated.
Right.
When you think about the carpentry work, the complex carpentry work, because all of the ogival vault required building the thing out of wood first, and then assembling the masonry over the wood, and then once the masonry is set up with mortar, by the way, that's as strong as the stone itself, which then integrates the whole thing into a single mass. You then take down the formwork, so you don't get to see the intricate geometry of the carpentry work that had to go into place. The sculpture on these things is phenomenal. And then you realize we're talking about the employment of hundreds of thousands of people. For about a century and a half, and then the infrastructure that had to be in place, and then the fact that the phenomena you don't see a gradual germination period, just so much like many of these other, if we go back to the Old Kingdom of Egypt, we see almost no germination period.
None.
You can cite a couple of examples, the step pyramid at Saqqara, yeah, sure, okay, but then a generation later, they're building the Great Pyramid, 482 feet tall, with just, okay, so it just doesn't make sense to say, okay, you had this, subsistence farmers living in the Nile Valley, and then all of a sudden they're building these gigantic pyramids, and within 2 generations they've organized their entire society around this enterprise. Just like European society, the whole of European society in effect had to be organized around this enterprise to create these cathedrals. And then as quick as it started, it was over.
Right.
Yeah.
This is the thing, Randall, and I'm so glad that you get it. I've been trying to drive this point home. You deal with the logistics behind the design as well as the design itself, right, and that infrastructure.
Yeah.
When I look at the Great Pyramids, right, this is what I think. 2.5 million stones, right, in one pyramid. That means 2.5 million meals. 2.5 million copper chisels, 2.5 million this. You start to do the math on this, and it just doesn't figure. It doesn't add up. Where is the logistics that is behind it? You just can't tell me, oh, they built it in 20 years. No, there's 2.5 million of a lot of different things that are involved. You start to do the math, and it is a huge project. It is a huge population. It is organization beyond belief that did not occur and did not happen at 3000 BC. These were nomadic. When the Upper and Lower Egypt came together, those were tribes. And suddenly they become an upright civilization from one day to the next. And that, to me, just doesn't add up.
It doesn't add up. And to me either. It doesn't add up. And when I look at some of these enterprises, I look kind of like, what are some modern examples? I might think of the Manhattan Project.
Right.
During World War II.
Absolutely.
Which at that time was the largest mass mobilization of scientific and engineering expertise that had ever happened certainly in American society, if not anywhere. I mean, in modern times. And, you had well over 100,000 people employed on that. Interestingly, you only probably had half a dozen people that actually knew what the end result was, which is very interesting too. And so, but at the same time, you think, well, how was this happen? So all of the people involved in it, while they didn't necessarily know what the end product was going to be, they knew that it was somehow part of this mission to defeat fascism in Europe and the war effort and all that. So knowing that, they had this great motivation. In order to get people organized and on the scale that we look at when we see whether it was the Gothic cathedrals or the pyramids in Egypt or, the great ziggurats in Samaria or, some of the phenomenal architecture in Central and South America. Same thing. The question then becomes, how do you get people so motivated that they come together around this singular enterprise, this singular goal? That, to me, is the really interesting question, the crux of this whole thing. What is the single factor, if we can isolate a single factor, what is the thing that's motivating these people? And then the other question, of course, is the one you were getting at, is then where does the knowledge come from? Because when you think of the Gothic cathedrals as being an analog for all of this phenomena,
right?
What you see is that somebody had to have not only the knowledge, but somebody had to have the skills to organize on a whole social scale, on a scale that transcended national boundaries as they existed back then. Because this was not limited to, say, just France. It was also prolific in Germany and in the British Isles. And so there had to have been some common factor. And then there had to have been somebody who knew the significance of that common factor and was able to communicate it then on a broad scale and to say, look, this is the thing we have to do. And you can simplify it and say, well, it was this outpouring of religious sentiment and all that during the Middle Ages, but then why? That's just kind of kicking the can down the road, so to speak. Why were people so inspired or motivated that they would dedicate their entire lives for 3 or 4 generations to the completion of this particular project? And the same question then can be, extrapolated back in history to all of these other examples as well. So to me, it's like the two main questions is, who had the knowledge and ability to pull all of this together? And then how are they able to do it? How are they able to motivate an entire culture of people around this enterprise? And these, to me, are like the two fundamental questions.
It truly is. And I'm going to jump in because this is what I don't understand, and you're just the person to ask. Could you today build one of the Mason halls in one of the great cities of America without any plans, without any architectural drawings? Could you do it by word of mouth? Could you stand there and tell everybody what to do and get one of these stone edifices built? Is it possible? No, right?
It would be so difficult. I can't imagine how you would do it.
So how could you build the pyramids without plans, with somebody at a drawing board and a drafting machine drawing these complex angles and heights and rock and different, granite and tunnels that are perfectly straight and walls and everything else by word of, just telling somebody how to cut it? It just doesn't work that way, right? How could they do it without plans?
Right. And, in the Masonic symbolism, there is the master builder whose job is to draw the plans upon the trestle board, as they say. And I've always felt that was an analogy, that was a metaphor for something on a larger scale.
Right.
And then, interestingly, so they're building the temple, and the whole symbolism revolves around this idea of the temple as an effigy, if you will, for a model of, in effect, the universe, if you will. And this is the one thing that we can begin to understand about so much of the sacred architecture of old, is that this common theme that we discover in looking at the ideas and philosophy behind these sacred structures is that they were effigies of the universe as the builders and the designers understood it. In Masonry, the whole ritual is around the building of the temple as a model of the universe, as a model of the world as well, because, again, we're talking scale and variance here, okay? So the temple is a scale and variant miniaturization of the world, which in turn is a miniaturization, a scale and variant miniaturization of the universe, you see, of the cosmos, if you want to put it that way.
Right.
But in the Masonic ritual, what's interesting is that the temple doesn't get finished because the master builder is murdered. And so they don't finish the temple. And interestingly, the idea there was that there was the three Grand Masters, and each one had part of the sacred formula that, in effect, I would say was like the operating instructions for the temple. And each one of them had a piece of it. And so when the master builder was murdered, his piece was lost. And so Masons have ever since then, going back, the metaphor was King Solomon's temple that they used, but the idea was that ever since then, Masons have been searching for that lost part of the formula. And that's what the whole Masonic quest is about. And it parallels, in many respects, the quest for the lost Grail. And if you look at the Grail stories, it's clear what they're talking about there is that, in effect, what happens is that the kingdom, which is, proliferating and peaceful and harmonious and abundant, something happens and the balance of nature is thrown off, and what had been this beautiful kingdom becomes the wasteland, and the king becomes ill at the same time, with the idea that there's this link between the king and the kingdom. And so the king becomes sick, the kingdom becomes sick, and the only way to restore the kingdom and the king to health and fecundity and harmony is through the instrument of the Grail. So all of the knights of the 12 knights of the temple go on this cosmic quest, if you will, to search out the Grail. And when the Grail is found, the land is restored. The kingdom is brought back. The king is restored to life. The spell that has fallen over the kingdom is broken, in effect. And what's interesting here, Jimmy, is that while this sounds very fanciful, once we began to look into it, we discovered that the whole Grail Mythos revolves around the knights and the quest for the Grail and King Arthur's court at Camelot. And we discovered that in the legends of the Arthurian legends, that Arthur met his demise at the Battle of Camelot, which is usually dated at around 540 A.D. Now, what we know from paleoclimatology is that around 540 A.D., there was a major environmental catastrophe. And one of the symptoms of that catastrophe is that in the Northern Hemisphere, forest growth, and this has been well documented now by tree ring studies, by dendrochronologists, forest growth almost came to a complete stop for about a decade. And this is when the darkness came into the world. Literally, the darkness came into the world, and the popular accounts and the monastic accounts that have survived from that day describe a literal darkness. And we now know that it's likely that when this shroud of darkness came over large parts of the world, forest growth, trees don't really grow without the light. They can't. There's no photosynthesis without light.
Right.
So then what we see happen, though, is that, and how interesting then, that the setting for the quest for the Grail turns out to be precisely this time when there is a major environmental downturn in large parts of the Earth. Now, for the next roughly 300 years, we've got the Dark Ages.
Nothing.
And then the Dark Ages, the cold and the dark passes, and the medieval warm period begins, and the ice that has come down during these years of cold and dark begins to retreat back to the north. The sea lanes open up. The growing season lengthens. People have more to eat. They're starting to live longer. Babies are surviving. People get stronger. There's actually well documented during the Middle Ages up to 4 and 6 inches increased average body height over a period of about 3 to 4 generations. And so what happened is the Dark Ages passed. We came into what is referred to as the medieval warm period. People had food to eat, and now societies did begin to grow wealthy, and because there were surpluses, bountiful agricultural harvests, and so on. Now, imagine this. You've got this going on for 3 or 4 generations from about 900 A.D. up to 1100 A.D., and now society has grown wealthy enough that it is capable of undertaking an adventure, an enterprise like this Gothic building phenomena that I'm talking about.
Well, let me ask you this then, Randall. I always assumed, and again, this is Orthodox academia, affecting my brain, but I always assumed the Dark Ages were caused because of the fall of the Roman Empire. Their intelligence was retracted. They had to go back to Italy, and all of those, Roman legions are no longer, the writing, the intelligence, the math, the architecture, that's pulled out of Great Britain, and they were left with, no intelligence, and everything pulled back. But you're suggesting that it was a natural phenomenon, which I can buy into. But what would cause the darkness? Again, was it some kind of cosmic event?
Oh, I think it was a cosmic event, and there's evidence that supports that. There are at least 2 fairly large impact craters, one off the coast of Norway and one off the coast of New Zealand, that appear to date right somewhere between 536 and 544 A.D. In addition, it's also very plausible that there were some major volcanic eruptions at the same time. So it may have been a period that was almost like a perfect storm where you had this confluence of exogenic and endogenic phenomena that brought it on. But the things you're citing, of course, were factors. There's no question those were factors. What I think we need to begin to look at, though, is how much were some of those social factors actually the consequence of these natural changes that were going on.
Yeah.
And what...
I want to just say this because you're causing me to think now, and I don't mean to interrupt, Randall. That's rude of me. But what if the two are combined? What if the retraction and the fall of the Roman Empire was tied into these other natural phenomena that were going on at the same time, and was also part of this coincidence? Yeah,
and I think that's very plausible. And one of the things, the time frames that I have looked at extensively is that transition out of the Ice Age and how humans might have coped or adapted. And, I think it's very likely that humans probably came close to extinction during those same episodes that wiped out half of the megafauna of the planet.
Right.
And which to me is argues against the idea that humans were in some way responsible, because that has been the dominant theory for at least half a century now. Is that, and of course, it's applied almost exclusively to mammoths, woolly mammoths in particular, that humans hunted those to extinction. But like I was saying earlier, there's been over 100 of species that went extinct. So the one point I was about to make before the last break, and then we'll come back to this question, is that if we look at the mass extinction event that occurred simultaneous with the end of the last ice age, what we see is that the number of species that went extinct within probably less than a millennium was over 100 species. Now, some of the arguments are that the species didn't all go extinct at one time, so it couldn't have been a singular cause. But I think that's an oversimplification, because I think you can have trigger episodes, trigger events that basically then have repercussions that can last for centuries or a millennium. Just like when you have a major earthquake, you will quite frequently have aftershocks that can cause considerable amount of damage. Oftentimes you'll have foreshocks before the earthquake, the major earthquake comes on. And again, scaling up, what we see happening at the end of the last ice age was that there was a globally catastrophic event, and it would have certainly been followed, I think, by a whole series of aftershocks. I think all of the evidence supports the idea that there was at least several millennia of aftershocks that would have made it difficult for people to basically organize socially and culturally and create a civilization. And in the wake of the last ice age, and we could apply what I'm about now to say about, on a smaller scale to the onset of the Dark Ages, what we see is that there were large regions of the Earth's surface that became depopulated, not only by megafauna, but by humans, right? And what you also had was a rapid rise of at least 100 parts per million of carbon dioxide as a result of this warming, which is occurred, between 13,000 and about 11,000 years ago. And sea levels, of course, are coming up. So as the sea levels are rapidly rising, coastlines are migrating. And, when we look at the history of civilization, we see that the first great cities were port cities. They were built on the coastlines. And it was those port cities that began to establish the trade networks that led to a much larger integrated society, right? But you couldn't have that when the sea level is still rising as part of its post-glacial 400-foot sea level rise.
Right.
It's only when finally sea levels stabilize that now you can start settling communities on the coastlines of the world, and those communities can turn into civilizations. But in any case, when we see the Younger Dryas events that ended the Ice Age and the catastrophic ending of the Ice Age, and then we look at what came in the aftermath, what we see is that, interestingly, the climate warmed into this 3,000 to 4,000 year period called the hypsothermal or climatic optimum, where most estimates put the global climate at least 1 to 2 degrees warmer than now. Yes, I'll say that again, at least 1 to 2 degrees warmer than now. It used to be called the climatic optimum because all the people who were studying it looked at it and said, well, what a great time for, human beings to be alive on Earth, particularly in the aftermath of the Great Ice Age.
This is what's crazy. I have to take a break right here, but this is what's crazy. You just made half of Washington, D.C. very happy right now. And what's going on with what is causing the climate change today. And I'm with you on this, Randall. We're going to pick up right there when we come back. This is Fade to Black. Our guest tonight, Randall Carlson. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Right back.
Hi everybody, this is Rob Halford, the Metal Guard on jimmychurchradio.com.
KGRA Radio. Intelligent talk.
Do you know what's in your body soap? Well, I didn't know the answer until about 5 years ago when I looked at the label of my soap and was shocked to see all the chemicals. For my entire life, I had been assaulting the largest organ of my body, my skin, and to think my children were using it too. Well, a lot has changed since then. Today, my family and I operate Stone City Farms, where we make and sell all natural goat milk soap using fresh goat milk from goats we raise on our farm. Our mission at Stone City Farm is to produce high-quality, all-natural goat milk soap for people who want a fresh, unrefined, natural product. At Stone City Farms, we offer scented and unscented soaps and a signature line of gift sets customizable to your needs. To see what our customers are saying, go to StoneCityFarm.com. Use the code NATURAL for a 20% discount. That's StoneCityFarm.com, code NATURAL for 20% off your order. You never know what could be hiding in your soap.
So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7 with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
Would you like relief from muscle pain, headaches, and discomfort to sleep better, have more energy during the day, and just feel naturally amazing? Fibromalic can help. Its blend of malic acid and magnesium can provide pain relief and comfort for those who experience fibromyalgia. It helps your body absorb more oxygen, and it works quickly for a significant reduction in pain within 48 hours, all without a prescription. Ask for Fibromalic at health and vitamin shops or shop fibromalic.com.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi available, you can still listen to every minute of Fade to Black by just calling 605-562-4482. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan and no extra cost if you have unlimited minutes. Just call 605-562-4482. You can listen to me, Jimmy Church, on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Göbekli Tepe.
You want to know a secret? I love ponies. I really love ponies. I'm serious. I couldn't stay sane without ponies to brush.
Why fade to black? Because you never got that pony, damn
it. This is Fade to Black with Jimmy Church on the Game Changer Radio Network and KGRA, the Global Radio Alliance.
All right, welcome back, Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Network and KGRA The Planet. You can follow me on Twitter at JChurchRadio. Email is jimmy@jimmychurchradio.com. Our guest tonight, Randall Carlson. And Randall, right before the break, and I saw Twitter light up as you said that. When it comes to climate change, let's just cut to the chase here. Is it caused by us, or is it a combination, or is it just something cyclical?
I definitely think humans are a factor, a player in climate change. But my problem with it is what's being presented in mainstream media and in basically government-funded science about climate change is that it looks exclusively at the anthropogenic role. And you know, for so long, I have been looking at paleoclimatology and looking at these natural changes that have been going on every time scale that you can possibly imagine, from annual to decadal to century to millennial and beyond.
Right.
And I could not accept somebody saying, well, all of these forces that have had such a dramatic part to play in changing this constantly altering dynamic planet that we live on are now suddenly no longer operational, and it's only carbon dioxide. And so, and it's not really me. It's, hey, I don't necessarily want to go where I go with this, but when I read the evidence and I look at this and I realize, yes, there's mountains of evidence that the climate has been warmer than now many times. And we talked about the medieval warm period, and I don't know if we want to really get into that or if we have enough time tonight to get into any kind of in-depth discussion about that, because I would rather not get into it unless we did get into a level of in-depth discussion. But the one thing that I was talking about was this, what's called the hypsothermal. And if anybody wants to look it up, they can. It used to be called the climatic optimum, simply because when they first, like in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, realized that those 3 or 4 millennium right after the Ice Age were very warm, in fact, warmer than now, they thought of it as a benign time, and that's why it was called the climatic optimum. I don't know why the term for it has been shifted to the hypsothermal, other than to de-emphasize the fact that the initial scientists that looked at it thought, this would have been a nice time to be alive. And one of the things that occurred, the studies were, they could see very clearly, pollen studies, for example, showed tree species and plant species growing 300 and 400 and 500 miles and more north of where they now grow. Evidence showing that tree lines around the world, particularly in the northern hemisphere during this time, were hundreds of feet higher than now. In other words, there were trees growing. A lot of with the deglaciation that we were talking about earlier during the Little Ice Age, during that Little Ice Age, you've got to bear in mind that we had some of the coldest centuries of the last 10,000 years. Yes, we had several of those centuries during the depths of the Little Ice Age were some of the coldest centuries of the last 10,000 years. Glaciers worldwide grew during the Little Ice Age. There are many interesting woodcuts and paintings and sketches and so on of the glaciers in Europe extending down out of the mountains and swallowing up farms and villages and increasing in mass and size bigger than they had ever been in living memory. And then between roughly 1820 and 1850, the glaciers started receding back, which they have in effect been doing for 200 years. And basically, one of the things that happened when these glaciers started receding back was the various scientists came and examined, looking at the landforms and what was revealed by these glaciers, many that have receded back several kilometers from where they were at their maximum growth, maybe 150 to 200 years ago. And what it revealed was that there had been forests there, that there were the stumps of trees that had been sheared off by the glaciers that had come down. So clearly, when those forests were growing there, the glaciers had to have been smaller, right? There's no way you can explain that. And these are completely well-documented facts that just most people don't realize, but they're there. So there's a whole confluence of evidence that suggests that there have been times where the planet has gone into these periods of warmth. Now, during the climatic optimum, from roughly 7,000 to 10,000 years ago, what you had was very little competition for resources because, for one thing, the food chain has been basically decapitated, and you've got many of these big predators are now gone, which meant that you had a proliferation of small game that occurred in this aftermath of the catastrophes that ended the Ice Age. You also had, like I said, tree lines and viable agriculture potential hundreds of feet, 400, 500, 600, 700 feet higher than now in the mountainous regions and the upland regions. You had a growing season that's been estimated to be maybe 4 to 6 weeks longer. So you had tremendous resources available. You had basically large parts of the Earth's surface that had been depopulated, right? So now you have very little competition for resources. And I think the models of basically post-catastrophe world shows that humans survived in scattered remnants, scattered bands. Many lines of evidence would suggest that in the aftermath of the Younger Dryas transitions, that what you had was scattered bands of survivors living. initially very difficult, but then as the planet began to settle down after the end of the Ice Age, and you had this warmth that came into the world, which may have been, and probably was, solar related, you had a proliferation of human population. And basically over the next 3,000 to 4,000 years, you have a growth of human population. This would have been sort of the be fruitful and multiply time, because if and some of the evidence is pointing in this direction. If the human species was reduced in numbers to where it was perhaps hovering, we as a species were perhaps hovering on the borderline of extinction, going the way of the woolly mammoths and the giant ground sloths and the saber-toothed cats and all the rest of the megafauna we shared the planet with for so many thousands of years, then probably one of the preeminent moral injunctions upon us would be to, be fruitful and multiply, replenish the human species to get it to jack up the population levels to where you can, offset an potential extinction event. And so this is what we see. We see the human population rapidly growing during that climatic optimum period, and then you get to, and interestingly, I'll add on top of that, in the work of Maria Gimbutas, the anthropologist who studied that late Paleolithic or early Neolithic, the terminology has changed, but the early Neolithic times, reported in her monumental works that amongst all of the artifacts and tools and things that she looked at amongst the settlements, the abandoned settlements, Neolithic settlements that she looked at, in all of that, she could find no evidence of human conflict. In other words, she couldn't find weapons of war.
Right.
She couldn't find, in looking at the settlements, she didn't find evidence of palisades that had been built as defensive, or moats that were oftentimes used defensively. But then, interestingly, we get to this end of the climatic optimum into what the paleoclimatologists call the neoglaciation, and this happened not everywhere simultaneously, but around 6,000 years ago, the planet began to cool. And one of the things that happened as a result of that is tree lines dropped by hundreds of feet, the growing season contracted, and there would have been a major disruption of human patterns of settlement that had been entrenched for, thousands of years. And guess what we then see coming in the aftermath of that global cooling is conflict. We see the first evidence of war. And then, after about a millennium of that, then all of a sudden we see, Old Kingdom of Egypt, we see the Indus Valley civilization springing up, we see Sumeria springing up, we see the first monumental earthwork architecture appearing in North America. I think some of the Incan architecture in South America dates to that time. And it's like, well, in 9,000 years ago, there probably was not a labor force capable of undertaking projects on that scale. By 5,000 years ago, there was. But again, then it gets back to the question we were talking about earlier. How do you get them organized, and where is the source of the knowledge? Because when you look at these structures, from Göbekli Tepe to the Giza Plateau to the sacred cities of Central America, the megalithic complexes of the British Isles, what do we see over and over and over again is sophisticated astronomy, sophisticated geometry, encoded in there, symbolism. There's clearly something going way beyond what we have assumed is the level of intellectual achievement of people at that time. Somewhere, somebody had this knowledge. Now, if we go back to the catastrophes that terminated the late Pleistocene, the Ice Age, the former World Age, if you want, and we look at how it would have affected human society at that time, whatever it may have been, clearly people were dramatically affected. And the evidence is suggesting that, like in North America, the Clovis culture suddenly disappeared at 12,900 years ago.
Right.
And in many of the places that had been occupied actively by the Clovis people were vacated for 500 to 1,000 years. And then you see the reemergence of people, with actually different patterns of life, so different that they're given a different name, the Folsom culture. And I think we could see this probably replicated around large parts of the globe. But so if you go back to the catastrophes that terminated the Ice Age, I would speculate that you had two categories of survivors. Those who survived because of the luck of the draw, they happened to be in the right place at the right time, whatever fluke within the confluence of things happening, they were spared. You know, they lived. It's just like, you know, when they drop the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and you look and everything's devastated, but there's one building still standing there in the middle.
Right.
You know, so it's like there are, an ecologist refers it to uses the term refugium, which is the place where when the landscape gets devastated, all life gets wiped out, it's barren, like in the aftermath, for example, of a gigantic volcanic eruption where the land gets buried in lava or ash. You might have a pocket, for whatever reason, something survives, and then the recolonization of those vacated habitats emanates out from those little pockets, those refugium where life has survived. And that's, I think, what we're seeing now in the post-catastrophe aftermath, how human society reestablished itself from these refugium. And then the population began to grow. Once it began to grow, connections began to form, trade networks formed, and now you begin to, an integration on a much larger scale. But initially, in the aftermath of the catastrophe, if, just like now, if there was a major catastrophe and this modern infrastructure was suddenly brought down, people are going to be thrown into a turmoil, and, you know, people who have no preparation are going to be much, much more stressed and tested than those who have prepared. Now, if you go back to 12,000 or 13,000 years ago, I think we might, as a hypothesis, speculate that there were two categories of survivors. The ones who survived by the luck of the draw, who then, in the aftermath, would have been wholly preoccupied with just day-to-day survival. And then you may have had those who survived because, for whatever reason, they had foreknowledge that something was going to happen. They prepared, they created a refugium, they created a sanctuary where knowledge could be preserved, and then in the aftermath of these events, it takes 3 or 4 or 5 millennium for the population to reestablish itself to where now you actually have enough people to build a pyramid. I mean, you may know how to build the pyramid, but if you have no labor force, I mean, I know how to build a house, but if I don't have a team in place, you know, I can't build it unless I attempt it by myself, and then I'm certainly not going to be able to build a house in 8 or 10 weeks or 3 months like I might now. It would take me 30 years probably to do it all by myself. But clearly I think what you see is this, that there was somebody who had a tradition of knowledge that went way beyond the basically Stone Age level of most people on the planet between 5 and 10,000 years ago. And at such point when society had evolved to where you now had enough people and, you know, a lifespan and a potential labor force, now you bring forth this knowledge that you've got and you say, okay, we have to create this infrastructure. But then that brings us to the next question is, you know, how do the people become motivated? Well, if it turns out that what is motivating people the world over is something that they're all commonly experiencing, then we've got to ask, what are the potential possibilities here that you could have experienced simultaneously by people all over the world? And I think that the most likely answer to that is something cosmic. Something was happening in the sky, something was happening in the cosmos on a larger scale that profoundly influenced people's thinking, so that when somebody came forward and said, okay, in response to what we've just experienced, this is what we have to do. And
what about, well, and let me jump in impolitely. When we talk about where did the knowledge come from, that is that's the paramount thing, especially when we're dealing with something as old as Göbekli Tepe. Where did the knowledge come from? Are we entering dangerous ground and starting to tip things over a bit too much to suggest that there was a high intelligence civilization from 20,000 years ago, 30,000 years ago, that was on the edge of extinction, that did survive the Ice Age, and then that's where the knowledge came from? for Göbekli Tepe or for Egypt to be upright at 3100 BC, that it came from a lost civilization that we don't know anything about? And is there evidence for that?
Well, I would say that all of this stuff we're discussing here could be taken as evidence for that. I mean, even though it's a circumstantial case, we have to acknowledge, yes, it's circumstantial. But really, there's nothing so implausible about it that we should just knee-jerk reject the idea.
Right.
Because, again, like we were talking about earlier, Jimmy, we modern humans have been walking around on this planet for perhaps a couple of 100,000 years, carrying the same size brain craniums that we've got right now. Well, how come there was no tradition of accumulated learning passed on from one generation to the next? And
why not?
When we look
right.
at how rapidly we rose from basically feudalism of the Middle Ages up to the Renaissance, then the scientific Enlightenment, and in the Industrial Age, and where we're at now, we're only talking 3 or 4 centuries. Well, 3 or 4 centuries is nothing within the long span of the human tenure on Earth. Like we were talking about, 3 or 4 centuries. I mean, what's that? That could easily disappear within, 20,000 years. Okay? That's my point, is that we have to begin to rethink. We can't just, like I said, knee-jerk respond to say, oh, well, we don't have the hard evidence. Well, no, we don't have the hard evidence. Well, now we do have hard evidence in the form of Göbekli Tepe,
right.
And I'm sure there are more discoveries to come
right.
that are not going to fit the conventional paradigms of our own past. But then when you turn...
Oh, go ahead.
Well, when you turn to the traditions that have come down to us through folklore and through mythology and so forth, what's another consistency? They all agree that there were the catastrophic events, whether floods or fires or gigantic events, all over the world. We see this agreement that, yeah, there were catastrophic events that profoundly affected people of the past, right? The second thing is that there were traditions of another order of civilization, whether you go to Plato, whether you go to the biblical accounts of the Garden of Eden, or whether you go to Hyperborea or Atlantis. The list goes on that, even Native American mythology has many references to a much more sophisticated order of things that once existed. The Mayans have the same thing. I mean, over and over and over again, we see this theme. Where did that come from if there's no basis to it at all? Right? Yes.
And where this is what really blows my mind. If you go from 2650 BC, the Old Kingdom, 4th Dynasty, building of the pyramids and that knowledge, and the degradation of technology that occurred in Egypt. If you look at the way that we have progressed, modern man, from, let's just pull out a nice round number, 1700. From 1700 to today, we have gone from basically the same technology, which was no electricity, fires, we had the wheel, okay, we had the printing press, but basically we were Stone Age man in 1700, 1600. To now, we have flat screen TVs and we've been to the moon, right? Why wasn't that same progression taking place in Egypt? They had math, they had astronomy, they were able to build the pyramids to magnetic north on leveled land, right? They were obviously advanced, but they didn't take it anywhere. They should have had electricity in 3,000 years, but they had nothing at the end of 3,000 years. Well, it just doesn't make sense how they went backwards and didn't progress forwards. By all accounts, Egypt should rule the world today, right?
Right. And what Graham says before, which resonates with me, is that when we're looking at, the very beginnings of history, we're not really seeing the beginning of something, we're seeing the end of something.
Over and over again. Over and over again. We saw it with Rome, we saw it with Greece, Egypt, over Mayans, the Incas, everything rose up, was there, and then went away. We're always seeing the end. I can't explain it. Do you think that we are possibly in that same type of period today?
Well, we certainly could be, and I'm hoping that, it's kind of like, I think we're kind of straddling the fence right now, and it's kind of like we're in the arena, and we're hanging on the fence. We don't know which way to go, but on one side there's a ferocious bull ready to gore us if we jump the wrong way.
Right.
If we jump the other way, then there's a whole other domain at our disposal. And I would like to think that, we have the potential now to take this thing to the next level. And, a big part of, I'll go back to the Holy Grail thing. I mean, what I have read in my immersion into the Grail literature is that basically they're describing a catastrophe. In the post-catastrophe world, the world has become a wasteland. And in an effort to restore that wasteland, there is this thing called the Grail. To me, as I go into the Grail and the descriptions of the Grail, which are extremely confusing and again, beyond really what we could get into tonight, but they're described in so many different ways that there's almost no sense to them. It sounds like a complete almost mess. The way the Grail, mostly people picture it as this cup, but it's been described many different ways, and the accounts are very conflicting. But as I have worked my way through these exhaustively, off and on over the years, then I kind of come to a scenario somewhat like this. I think, take an automobile as a representative of our modern technological society. Now, suppose you had a catastrophe that wiped out modern civilization completely, and then somebody comes along several thousand years from now wondering about what may have existed in the past. And they find a manual describing how to repair automobiles. You go in there and there's a chapter on carburation, there's a chapter on ignition, there's a chapter on the chassis and everything about an automobile, right? Well, now suppose further that instead of all accessible in one manual, the manual has been broken up into pieces, and all these chapters are now dispersed. And you might read a discussion of the suspension system, but then if you read it next to a discussion of the braking system or the carburation system, you're going, well, these, I don't see how these fit together.
They don't relate, right?
Right, but when you have all of the pieces, you put them together, you go, oh, okay, here what? We can build a car, and we can get in that car, and we can go from point A to point B. But only once all of these parts are integrated. In the Grail literature, and that's not the only example, I think what we're seeing is a deliberate dispersion of knowledge. And that deliberate dispersion was done so that, because if the knowledge is preserved in one place, it's vulnerable. You know that any business growing to survive, it has to it diversifies. If it has all of its eggs in one basket, it's going to be vulnerable to the vagaries of the marketplace. So if you want to survive in business, you diversify. If you want to preserve knowledge, a tradition of knowledge over many generations, you've got to diversify that knowledge into multiple venues to see that it gets to the future. And I think that a big part of what that knowledge is about is the cycle that affects this planet, and that we have to figure all of our planning within a natural cycle that's playing out as part of the larger cosmic pattern of which we are a part, and that we've had our ancestors on this planet that have lived through and seen the manifestations and the effects of these cycles, and set out basically to preserve knowledge and to transmit this knowledge down through the generations, so that it's sort of like this, Jimmy. I think of it as it's a big racetrack, and we're on a car, and we're speeding around a racetrack, but unlike most racetracks, there are other roads that crisscross this racetrack. And as long as we're the only car on this racetrack, no problem. But then if it turns out that there's traffic on these other roads that intersects this racetrack we're on, then while we're crossing those other roads, we are much more vulnerable to getting into a crash and having an impact. And what I'm seeing now from astronomical studies and astronomical evidence is that the cosmos is arrayed in such a way that there are times when the Earth is much more vulnerable to what happens in the cosmos than at other times. And that within the cycle, which has come down to us preserved in the symbol or tradition of the great year, there are these points of vulnerability. And when the Earth happens to be occupying, or should I say perhaps the solar system is occupying one of these areas of vulnerability, the potential for something to happen here on Earth rises by orders of magnitude, right? And I think that this is a big part of the teaching that has come down to us, preserved not only in ancient manuscripts, but in rituals, and importantly, in the symbolism and traditions associated with sacred architecture. And we see this all over, and this could be a whole subject that we could talk about in another session,
right?
How this symbolism was preserved. But I think it basically points to not only the structure of space, but the structure of time as well. And this integrated knowledge of the structure of space-time has been part of what this ancient sacred tradition that has been handed down through the generations is all about. And that we can now take this information, it has come down through us through all of these venues, and begin to put it together. 100 years ago, 200 years ago, this was not possible because nobody in the world 100 or 200 years ago had access to such a multiplicity of traditions as we do today,
right,
so that you could sit down and go, wait a second, look at here. Look at the symbolism of Chichen Itza and look at the symbolism of Angkor Wat, and it's telling us the same damn thing.
Right.
Look at the symbolism of the Giza Plateau. There it is. Look at the symbolism of megalithic Europe in the standing stone circles, and it's the same stuff. It's
over
the same knowledge.
and over, yes. And what's the advantage for the man to keep this suppressed? Because it's somewhere, and Randall, I know that you agree with me, somewhere out there, they know about this. This information is there, and they've known about it forever, but they keep it from us. And what's the advantage of it when we could progress and glow as a race?
Well, see, Jimmy, you just brought up a very interesting question, one that I have struggled with over the decades. As I've learned more and more, and I realize, okay, it's taken me 45 years of basically 2 to 4 hours of study every single day.
Right.
I mean, that's been my habit since I got out of high school. I get off of work, and basically, in the old days, I headed to the library. I came home. I have an incredible library of resource material I've pulled together. And, I constantly interact with people that I think are some of the most knowledgeable people there are about some of these subjects. And I now am kind of in the position where I go, okay, if it's taken me 45 years to put these pieces together, who else would have done this? Is there somebody else out there that has done this? Is there somebody else? Even if I took all of this information and I put it on a thumb drive and I gave you the whole kit and caboodle, gigabyte after gigabyte of stuff, how much are you going to really know about it until you sit down and you spend years immersed in it, right?
Right.
So there's one side of me that says, yeah, let's be open to the idea that there is somebody out there, which I used to think, 3 decades, 4 decades ago, I certainly thought there was. And in a couple occasions, I met individuals who I thought were in the lineage of this kind of knowledge. I had very privileged opportunities on a couple of occasions. Then on the other hand, I go, well, I would think that at this time I would have seen something a little more specific, like, is there a hidden monastery somewhere where you've got, people living to be 200, 300 years? Because I think, okay, now, if I could keep doing this for another 40 or 50 years, hey, you know what? I'm going to really know a lot.
You're going to be a smart guy, right?
I'm going to have time I may actually figure out the answers to some of these questions.
Right.
But if they've only got another few decades, hey, I might not get there. But, hey, give me another century, So, but barring that, I'm like, see, on the other hand, I've seen what almost looks like a diminishment of knowledge, even going into the 20th century, because I use kind of the Masonic order as kind of an analogy. basically what happened was in the Middle Ages, the Freemasons were primarily the builders, the designers and builders of these cathedrals. That's the pedigree of the modern Masonic lodge.
Right.
And with the sudden cessation of the Gothic building phenomena, which interestingly took place literally like within a decade, and what we see, and I'm going to go, just a quick aside there, is that early 1300s is when we see the end of the Gothic building boom. Essentially, like I said, within a decade. That happens to be the same decade that there was a major downturn in global climate. There was a major cooling of the Earth that took place during the onset of the first phase of the Ice Age, a Little Ice Age. And between roughly 1320 and 1340, you had, over a period of about one generation, the onset of the Little Ice Age. And during that interim of roughly 20 years, you had, particularly in the northern latitudes, northern Europe and so on, where it's well documented, you had multiple crop failures. And in the wake of those crop failures, people got hungry. And then you began to have famine. And once people got hungry and got weak, you now had opportunistic diseases that seized the moment. And so in 1342, you had the onset of the bubonic plague. Just like in 542 AD, after a decade of agricultural collapses and downturn with the onset of the Dark Ages, you had the onset of the Justinian plague. Well, it's in that one generation between 1315 roughly and 1340 where the whole Gothic building enterprise comes to a sudden end, right? And then what happened was these lodges that had organized around this phenomenon that had this knowledge of, obviously they had knowledge of astronomy because the cathedrals are laid out astronomically. They're laid out according to solstitial lines, equinoctial lines, lunar geometry is encoded into them, the rising and setting of auspicious stars. There's a very sophisticated geometry. There's a very sophisticated astronomy. And then what you see happening is that with the decline of the building phenomena, they began to admit into their ranks men who were not active builders, who were not operating builders. So you went from operative masonry to philosophical masonry over the next couple of centuries. So that in the early 1300s, 1200s, the Masonic fraternity was all people who had been through this initiation process, had this knowledge on some degree, right? And if they chose to go through the ranks, more and more of this technology of building these things would be revealed to them. Well, then what happens is that with the decline of building projects, it went from being operative to being speculative or philosophical. And over the next 2 or 3 centuries, it shifted from being completely operative to virtually completely philosophical. And gradually what you see is that the ritual became disconnected from the building infrastructure that was sort of the time and space manifestation of the symbolism in the ritual, right? And then what you see is that the meaning and the connection of the ritual began to get lost. So that by the time you're coming into the 20th century, there's very few left who really understand what the original ritual meant, even though they're told in the ritual itself, well, if you want to understand the meaning of this ritual, there are some things you need to learn about. Astronomy and geometry being preeminent. You're just actually told that. Yet most Freemasons didn't actually take that to heart and actually study astronomy and geometry and rhetoric and some of the other subjects that you're encouraged to study. I did, on the other hand. I mean, I went and enrolled in astronomy and studied it academically. I have studied geometry for many years. That's why why I did Sacred Geometry International, because I was motivated to try to decipher what the ritual was saying. But what I'm getting at is that what you see this gradual decline of the understanding or comprehension of what was behind the symbolism. And I think a big part of the history of the 20th century was the recovery of things that had over the centuries been lost. With some of the work of people like John Michel and Keith Critchlow and John Anthony West, who, before we part tonight,
we're going to talk about absolutely. Oh, I wanted to ask you really quick before staying right here. I'm just going to go. I have to ask, what degree Mason are you?
Well, I went through the 32nd degree.
Okay, so 32nd. That. Let's stay here. With achieving that, the 32nd, are you comfortable with the knowledge that you have acquired from the Freemasons, or do you think that there's a secret room and some more material out there that you haven't accessed yet?
I think that, the 33rd degree has some material that I haven't accessed yet. Having known quite a number of 33rds, though, I don't think that there's, anything that you learn in there that, now I suddenly have the
enlightenment.
I'm suddenly in the driver's seat now,
right,
and I can control the world. I don't think there's anything like that there.
Well, okay, hold on. I have to ask. I have to go here, Randall. With all of the symbolism from Egypt that permeates throughout Freemasonry, which is wonderful and it's great to look at, and I enjoy it, and it's there. Is that because they have information from the older mystery schools going back to the very foundations of Egypt? Has that been preserved in Freemasonry?
I would answer that with a qualified yes. We can trace historical Freemasonry back to the Middle Ages and the building of the Gothic Cathedral.
Sure.
The more conservative histories of Freemasonry only trace it back to 1717 with the emergence of 4 Grand Lodges in the British Isles. But the obvious thing there is, wait a second, how could you have 4 Masonic lodges merge in 1717 if there weren't already Masonic lodges? But then we have, few scant records like Elias Ashmole being initiated into Freemasonry in the 1600s. But there's been some great works of scholarship over the last 20, 30, 40 years that have really begun to fill in the gaps between the rise of modern Freemasonry and the Gothic building times and the Guild of Gothic Builders, and also the connections with the Templar Knights. A lot of the symbolism that apparently was part of the that the Templar Knights were the custodians of did make its way into Freemasonry.
Yep.
Now, once we get back beyond that, I'm not sure, then that we sort of lose the trail. But there are definitely indications that we see when we go back, into Roman times. There was the Roman Collegium, and they were basically the builders of most of the Roman temples and infrastructure, and they had a ritual system and a system of philosophy and symbolism and so forth that was virtually identical to modern Freemasonry.
That's right.
When we go back to ancient Greece, we have the Dionysian artificers. Same thing.
Yep.
Same thing. They have this tripartite structure of initiation where you have these 3 degrees that brings you in.
Yep.
And then once you've shown that you're committed and you've learned and mastered these 3 degrees, then these other doors open up and you can access deeper layers of symbolism.
And then you skip across the Mediterranean right to the Nile, and the next thing you know, you've connected the dots. Let's. I want to save that for another show. Before we run out of time, we have to talk about our good friend John Anthony West, Jaws.
Yeah.
First question. We're going to put up the links right now in Twitter for the donation campaign on Fundly. We'll get that up. We'll talk about that in a second. Have you spoken to Jaws?
I haven't. I haven't spoken to him in, I guess, about a year and a half.
Okay. Well, I spoke to him last about, he was on the show in October, 6 months ago. And he's such a dear friend of the show, but that's one thing. That's a selfish thing for me to say. The point is, when it comes to Jaws, what he has done for all of us, our family, rolling that rock, that proverbial rock, uphill for so long, and sharing his knowledge, he has never given up. And he just means so much to all of us. And what does he mean to you, Randall?
Well, I discovered John's work with Serpent in the Sky, I think, in the 70s.
Right.
And, that led me, that was the first I'd heard about the Sphinx possibly being older. And that was one of the things that really inspired me to study geology academically, was the questions raised. And then through John, I discovered the work of Schwaller de Lubitsch.
Right.
And then I met John for the first time, I guess, it was about right at 21 years ago. I think it was 96. I finally met him. And we hung out, spent the day together, and shared stories and jokes, and then I've kept in touch with him. I tried to rendezvous with him. We were both in Egypt in 2010 at Luxor in the same day, and we couldn't connect at the time, which was a big disappointment to me. And if I had it to do over again, I would have made sure that I had arranged my schedule that we could have connected, because I had some questions about the geometry of Luxor that I thought he might be able to answer. He was definitely, I would list John as in the, half a dozen, maximum of 10 major influences on my thinking over the years, for sure.
I'll never forget.
I have a copy, an original signed copy, hardback copy of the Serpent in the Sky that I understand is worth $300 or $400 now at least.
I'll never forget the first time I saw Magical Egypt, and I watched in one of the intros, it's probably the first video, where he turns and looks in the camera. And I'm like, this is my boy, man. This is my guy right here. This is what I need. And he's been all of that. And he has, he's been on the show so many times. And Rita and I I've got a tear in my eye right now, literally. Rita and I have had the chance to hang out with him and sit next to him and just talk and rap, and his knowledge and what goes on inside of his head. I just can't imagine. And he just means so much to all of us. And again, his campaign, I don't know if you've checked the updates, but we've managed to get this up to, it's $92,300. How cool is that?
Very cool. I want to mention that, Cameron, who does who manages the Sacred Geometry International website, is offered some really juicy perks. And people need to go online, go to the website and see what he's doing. He's just done a Blu-ray version of Cosmic Patterns and Cycles of Catastrophe that gets into a lot of what you and I are discussing tonight, but with video footage and graphics and high-resolution images. And he's got a whole bunch of really cool perks. Plus, with the perks that, all the other perks that are out there for people who donate. So, I would like to encourage people to donate, because it would be, just like we were talking about earlier, hey, it would be wonderful if John could hang around for another 30 or 40 years,
Oh, man. Yeah, the thought of anything less than that, right?
Right.
It's just...
And see, that's one of the advantages. If we can beat some of these things that are sending us to an early grave, we're going to have more time to become wise. Because, you don't become wise in 2 or 3 decades of life. It happens.
It's impossible, and the only we need to expedite the wiseness, right? And the only way is guys like you, Hancock and Bavall and John Anthony West and Robert Schock. I call all of you guys friends, and listening, and I've had the opportunity to interview and sit down with all of you, right? All of you. And I would not be the person I am today without you guys and your contributions. I want to say this. You brought up perks. I have the list of perks here, and I want everybody to go over to the Fundly page and contribute. Top of the perks page is this show. For $50, just a very simple donation of $50, I will do a personal shout out on Fade to Black. $50. For $12, you'll get a shout out from Chris over at Den of Lore. $35, a personalized email from Chris and Alex from the entire project. All right. For $25 to $74, you'll get from Sacred Geometry International a download, HD download of cosmic patterns and cycles of catastrophe. How great is that? For $75, you'll get a signed physical copy of Cosmic Patterns and Cycles of Catastrophe by Randall Carlson. Thank you for doing that. I'm looking at a picture of it here. I want one.
Well, that can be arranged.
Yes, it can, and that is just so cool. And they go up from there. For $250, you can get one of 200 copies of autographed by Jaws, Symbolist Egypt. And black and white silver gelatin portraits of John Anthony West. Just go visit the Fundley campaign, and they are all right there. And I think if you kick down, let me see here. Hold on, I just want to see. Yeah, $5,000 will get you a weekend up at the Jaws pad, and they'll wheel in an Airstream trailer and park it next to Jaws's library right there on his property, and you get to hang out with Jaws for a weekend, you and 4 friends. So everybody go and visit the Fundley page. The links are up there right now. And this is what we do for family. He is family, and this is what we do for one of our own.
Geez, now I'm going to get a tear in my eye.
I know. I'll tell you what brought a tear to my eye was John couldn't do this next tour, right, over in Egypt.
Right.
And Shock said, you know what, I'll go. And he packed up and he went to Egypt and handled the tour for Jaws. And again, that's what we do for family. And, I just can't imagine a world without Jaws. And so we just need to do this. And this is what we do. The links are up on Fundley. And I think the links are up also over at Sacred Geometry International, right?
Yep. They sure are.
And now, besides Cameron, who else would you like to thank for this campaign that's working on it?
Well, Brad Young, who does this Geocosmic Rex website, where he has done an amazing job. He has, I would say, probably a half a dozen video clips of our journey with Graham Hancock, which are extremely interesting. A lot of other stuff related to what we've been talking about tonight. Articles, there's a lot of stuff there that complements the material that's over at Sacred Geometry International. So I would encourage people to go there as well. Geocosmic Rex, just like it's spelled. I'm sure just put it in geocosmicrex.com. It will get you there. And a lot of video clips and some awesome drone footage we did on our last excursion out there in the fall across the floodlands that are documented in Graham's book, Magicians of the Gods, which I would recommend to everybody to get and read if they were more interested in learning about Göbekli Tepe and the great Ice Age floods and the catastrophe at the end of the last Ice Age that we've been talking about. He does a very good job of putting it all together, and his discussion of the history of the science behind the great mega floods is really well done. And I would like to extend to you, Jimmy, an invitation to at some point join me in the field. So you can have an experience yourself personally of some of these landscapes.
I would love that. And this is the thing, and thank you for that. And we will do it, Randall. And that, Jaws said to me one time, he said, Jimmy, don't you go to Egypt without me. Right. And if I find out that you and Rita went to Egypt and I wasn't your tour guide, and that's it, Rand. I would love to go out there in the field with you, Rita and I, and let's go do something together. And that's part of sharing the knowledge. I know nothing. You guys know it all. And I want to thank you again for coming on the show tonight. Now, when you come on next time, I do want to get into not only the mystery schools, but the foundations of the Knights Templar through Freemason, the Rosicrucian, all of that right over here to the United States, and the symbolism that we see around us today. And I think that'll be the next show. What do you say?
I think I could handle that.
You're the best. Thank you so much, Randall.
Did I have the final word on any of that, of course?
Well, that's part of it, right? You know,
that's absolutely part of it. Well, isn't that why we do this? Because now we can draw on people's thoughts and information and knowledge from all over the world.
Well, I want you to have the final say here before I've got to roll credits. One of the issues that I have, Randall, and one that you deal with too, is that we need to all get along. All of the researchers out there, everybody out there, that where if you've got a different idea that doesn't agree with somebody else, that doesn't make you wrong or right. It's just another piece to the puzzle. How do you deal with that? I mean, I just don't get it. How can we get everybody to the table and just be friends?
Well, I guess for one thing is acting like grown-ups and not taking things personal, and not, keep it on the level. I always try to, when I get into sometimes Facebook debates with people or personal debates, I say from the outset, okay, let's not turn this into, a one-upmanship. Let's not start hurling insults. Let's stick to the ideas, because the substance of the ideas, because really shouldn't our goal be the quest for the truth?
Right.
The quest for knowledge, and we shouldn't be afraid to challenge each other. We should not, because I certainly don't have the final answer to the mystery, and I probably never will, but there are certain things that I have studied in depth very much that now might be particularly significant to our own times. And, if somebody wants to discuss climate change, I'm certainly willing to do that. If they want to study, the whole idea of ancient civilizations, I'm perfectly willing to do it, as long as we stick to the evidence, the facts, and we can discuss it like adults. And then we should all come away learning from it. Just like Robert Schock and I have different viewpoints on the Younger Dryas catastrophe. Although, as I have begun to look at his information, I have come to be convinced that he's definitely onto something. Right? With coronal mass ejections, because I have had a difficult time explaining all of the things that happened, although now I do believe that a cosmic impact was a big part of what happened at the end of the last ice age and the trigger for some of the great mega floods. Whereas Robert is not so much on board with that idea, but I certainly think that if he and I were sitting there discussing, and I laid out my evidence, and he laid out his evidence, that we could at some point come to a meeting of the minds, because that's ultimately, in the ancient Hindu, one of my teachers was, I'll do that really briefly, he was a Brahmin priest, and he was very, very learned in the Vedas, and he had been teaching and lecturing publicly on the Vedas since he'd been 12 years old, and he was a Sanskrit professor at the University of Minnesota when I met him and studied with him. And one of the things that he said was, well, in the classical Hindu traditions, you would have these debates that would last for days and days, and nobody the debate wouldn't be over until finally everybody had reached a meeting of the minds. Because, we're going to argue this back and forth in this quest for the truth, look for the truth, and whoever makes the better argument, who has is most logically consistent and is most consistent with reality as we understand it, we're going to try to stay here until we come to some kind of a meeting of the minds about this subject under discussion. And it seems that what happens today is, as soon as you start any kind of debate or different points of view, it becomes personal with people. And I've noticed this, time and time again, that, it gets into hurling insults and, these ad hominem attacks and things like that. And we've just got to rise above that.
It cannot be that way. And with that, Randall, I'm going to thank you now. The network's going to cut me off in 20 seconds, so I'm not going to cut you off. Stay right there. I'm going to read credits. Okay, stay right there. Fade to Black's executive producers, Rita Kamarian. Shows produced by Hilton J. Paul, Mark D. Kovar, LJ3, Renee, Jonas. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Bob. Announcers are Steve Harder, Gene Vitova, Mark D. Kovar. Fady by Dale. Webmaster is Drew the Geek. Music, Doug Aldrich. Intro, Spaceboy, spaceboymusic.com. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network. Syndication is KGRA The Planet. Very special thanks to Randall Carlson. This broadcast is owned and copyrighted 2016 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black or the Game Changer Network. With that, I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Say goodnight, Randall.
Good night, folks.
Everybody be safe. Göbekli Tepe.